They say the pinker the hair, the more secure the position. Yet he's been kicked out by his family 7 times. Because of his impure hair color, he took the fall for his adopted sister, going to prison in her place. He obeys his father's every command. He transferred his awakening magic to his brother. He did all of this just hoping for a word of concern from his family. But didn't you say you've died many times? You're used to it by now, right? Dying one more time shouldn't be a problem. Are these even words a human should utter? The family he poured his life into loving constantly tries to send him to the gallows. If only he'd realized sooner, like the neighboring Empress Rose. Perhaps he wouldn't be suffering like this. The 8th rebirth. Ceres finally stopped begging for her family's love. She stopped hiding her powerful magic. She ousted her father from his position as head of the family. This time, she's going to revel in solitude. Every life begins the same way. There's always that out-of-control monster, and her brother, who doesn't care if she lives or dies, only concerned for his adopted sister. Next time, I'll definitely save you first. These were her brother's words as he begged her to die. It's a complete joke. Filled with utter disappointment, Ceres unleashed the family's inherited power of spring. With a shriek, the monster was instantly bound and restrained by thick vines. You can bloom. Her brother's words were as thoughtless as ever. Faced with his real sister's sarcasm, Kalito hung his head in shame, unable to utter a word. But as soon as the little manipulator squeezed out a couple of tears, his shame would vanish like smoke. Ceres wasn't interested in watching this drama unfold. And who was it who'd been clamoring to see the monster? Not only that, but they had to have it released and up close. Flowers bloomed with every step she took as she ignored them both and strode away. In this country, there are 4 families with unique abilities representing spring, summer, autumn, and winter. But as time passed, the magical genes in their blood thinned. The Inodin family, representing spring, only had 1 inheritor per generation. Everyone believed it would be Ceres' brother, Kalito. However, it was now clear that was impossible. Kalito told his father about the day's events. His father was resolute. The power had to be his son's. He decided to talk to his daughter tomorrow. Ceres wasn't going to be manipulated this time. She arrived at the dining hall early in the morning and, under everyone's astonished gazes, picked up her knife and fork, preparing for a hearty meal. Miss, that's prepared for the head of the family. Because she'd never been allowed to eat in the dining hall, Ceres was firm. She was going to eat here today. Such a luxurious steak dinner. Something she wouldn't have dared to dream of in her past lives. She'd been given only scraps and leftovers. But things will be different now. Slamming her hand on the table, she declared, "From now on, my meals are to be of this standard." Having made her demands clear, she opened the door to leave, running straight into her father and brother arriving for their meal. "What are you doing in the dining hall?" It's a question only someone with 2 years of brain damage could ask. Ceres couldn't be bothered to answer such a stupid question. Ignoring them both, she walked away. Her father's roars followed her. "I said stop." Ceres turned around languidly. "What is it, father?" Infuriated by her attitude, he crossed his arms. "If you have something to say it quickly. If not," she was leaving. Since they both disliked each other, why waste time? Seething with rage, her father cursed under his breath as Kalito coaxed and pushed him into the dining hall. All that remained for them were 2 leaves and 2 small, sliced pieces of bread. He gritted his teeth. "Bring Ceres to me immediately." Because of her pink hair, she'd been scorned by her father since childhood, branded with the accusation of killing her mother. Her family would rather love a widow's daughter than spare her a glance. Even the housemaids dared to order her around, and they took pride in it. A noble cowering before them fed their vanity. But all of that ended today. The young lady dared to order her to fetch washing water. She had never seen that look in Ceres' eyes. A moment of confusion, then a face full of cold water. A maid giving her mistress cold water? "You must not want to work here anymore. Do you believe I could have your hand chopped off?" The maid instinctively touched her wrist. She'd never seen Ceres like this. Coupled with yesterday's rumors, she was terrified. Finally, some proper behavior. Ceres, looking at the few clothes in her wardrobe, felt a pang of discomfort. The beautiful clothes had always belonged to her sister. But none of that mattered now. In a blink, the shabby garments transformed into a cascade of rose petals. The girl who once begged for affection bid farewell to the past. The butler arrived with 2 maids. "Miss, the head of the family requests your presence immediately." Knocking had become a forgotten courtesy. Ceres wasn't having it. "If he wants me, he can come himself." Stunned faces stared back. "Are you serious? Do I look like I'm joking? Now, get out." They fled. The maids were convinced Ceres had lost her mind. The head of the family would be furious. Sure enough, just 3 seconds later, her father stormed in, enraged. Ceres, far from being afraid, couldn't help but sneer. Her father was livid. His daughter dared to laugh at him. Kalito, her brother, attempted to mediate, pulling at their father's arm and urging Ceres to apologize. Next time you go to the dining hall, remember to wait for father. Ceres found it absurd. I'm afraid the sight of you would ruin my appetite. Her father, reaching his limit, activated his ability, intending to teach her a lesson. Is this how I raised you, Ceres? Ceres was momentarily speechless. She slowly rose and walked towards him. Did you raise me? She stepped on his vines. A child's behavior reflects their upbringing. If he's so ill-mannered, isn't it because he lacked a father's and brother's love? Now you decide to exercise your parental rights? It's too late. Her father, suppressing his rage, attributed her defiance to yesterday's incident. With such impure hair color, how could you awaken the spring power? It was your brother who activated it to save you. He wanted her to keep a secret. Fat chance. Ceres walked out onto the balcony. She wouldn't obey him. Not anymore. Whether he chose to whip her in the name of discipline or make her disappear forever, he'd done it all before. She stood in the wind, turning. What would happen if she jumped? And what outcome did her father desire? He showed no sign of concern. She jumped without hesitation, leaving the curtains dancing in the wind. Her father rushed to the balcony. Ceres lay peacefully on a bed of rose petals. Crimson roses bloomed around her. Countless petals fell, a rose by her cheek, as if comforting her wounded heart. Her father's shocked expression met her gaze. She remembered her first life, awakening her ability after falling from the same balcony. She had foolishly apologized to her father. Because the power belonged to Kalito, her father had flown into a rage. Her brother had stopped speaking to her. She blamed herself for everything, becoming Kalito's shadow, helping him maintain the charade. But a single misstep, a moment of dizziness, earned her a brutal beating. Scorned by the servants, she waited outside all night, just to apologize to Kalito, only to be shoved away. He fell backward just like that. Until the very last moment, he still believed his brother would catch him. But he was wrong. The girl with powerful magic had seemingly gone mad. She wandered the castle in her nightgown every day and even jumped from the upper floor. Everyone was talking about her. The head of the Inadin family was incredibly busy because of this. The little schemer, Gabrielle, wasn't happy about this. Wearing her harmless smile, she approached Ceres and began her performance. "Oh, sister, you're here. I've been looking everywhere for you." Feigning anger, she continued, "I've been sick, and you didn't even come to see me." She acted as if she couldn't be consoled. But today, Ceres' reaction was a little different. Normally, Ceres would have been crying and begging for forgiveness by now. Gabrielle peeked, open one eye to gauge her sister's reaction. Unexpectedly, she met a cold, indifferent gaze, though a flicker of fear ran through her. Gabrielle's thick skin allowed her to continue unfazed. "My fiancé is coming to visit soon," she announced, showing off a sparkling necklace. "It's a birthday gift from him," she explained, feigning generosity. "I thought I'd show it to you, sister." She overflowed with fake enthusiasm. Ceres was well aware of her tricks. The moment she accepted the necklace, Gabrielle would cry and accuse her of stealing it. Ceres simply said, "You're blocking my son." Countless vines erupted from the ground. A shriek pierced the air. Gabrielle found herself hanging upside down, her legs entangled in the vines. This scene was witnessed by Chris, Gabrielle's fiancé, as he arrived. However, he turned a deaf ear to his fiancé's cries for help. He walked straight towards Ceres and knelt on one knee. Lifting a strand of her hair, he began to flatter her. "It's an honor to meet the new master of the roses, Miss Ceres. Come home with me," he urged, completely ignoring his frantic fiancée hanging above. He wore an expression of utter confidence. Ceres, looking at him, didn't say a word. She brushed his hand away and turned to leave. Chris tried to follow, but a rose vine forcibly held him back. He was confused. Ceres liked him, didn't she? Could awakening her powers have changed her personality? Chris wasn't entirely delusional. Ceres had always had a secret crush on him. During her first rebirth, Ceres couldn't tell if it was a dream or reality, but Chris had found her then. He had expressed sympathy for her plight. This man was the heir to the Winter Clan and betrothed to Gabrielle for political reasons. Though her heart fluttered, Ceres reminded herself that she couldn't steal her sister's fiancé. But then he said he wanted to take her away, that it was her he wanted to protect. In that moment, she wavered. She allowed herself to be greedy, just this once in this dream. So, she foolishly took his hand. Now, it seemed clear that he'd had ulterior motives. Every time Chris had sought her out, it was only after her powers had awakened. After all, a child born from their union would undoubtedly possess powerful abilities. Lost in thought, Ceres realized she was hungry. Her maid, Roy, scurried off to prepare a meal. Just then, Kalito arrived, his face dark with anger. He stormed into the room, intending to demand an explanation for why she had attacked Gabrielle. But remembering his sister's previous suicidal act, a flicker of conscience softened his tone. Ceres denied it outright. "I didn't attack her," she stated. "I simply found her presence irritating and asked her to leave." Kalito couldn't contain himself any longer. He thought his sister was lying. So many people had witnessed the incident. Besides, Gabrielle had been crying so pitifully. Ceres let out a cold laugh. She would show her brother what a real attack looked like. As he spoke, the vine shot directly towards Kalito. A loud crash echoed. The wall behind him was instantly pierced. Kalito nearly lost control of his bladder in terror. His face was scratched and bleeding. Fear gnawed at him. Ceres' face remained impassive. See that? She loved her brother dearly. Yet, he pushed her down the stairs with his own hands. He even begged on his knees for a bloodless, manipulative girl, asking her to die. Ceres, betrayed and deceived by her family, finally stood her ground in this life. Listening to her brother's biased accusations, she unleashed her power to teach him a lesson. Kalito was stunned. Was this still his timid little sister? If he hadn't dodged just now, he would be dead. Ceres remained indifferent. She believed actions spoke louder than words. Her brother might not understand mere talk. "Now you see, if I had attacked Gabrielle, how could there be no blood? Even if I were injured, you wouldn't care, would you? Look, people only understand pain when it affects them personally." Brother seems very upset, but what did she care? Ceres turned to May. She wanted to change rooms immediately. News of this quickly reached Gabrielle. A servant told her that her brother had been attacked for defending her. She broke out in a cold sweat. This wasn't how she imagined it. Her brother should have been scolding Ceres, not getting hurt. She had no desire to relive the experience of being hung upside down like a swing earlier that day. Ceres wanted to move to her floor, must mean she wanted to bully her more easily. Her paranoia was truly unmatched. A strange noise came from outside the door. Trembling, she opened it. She expected to see Ceres causing trouble, but instead, it was her father, who had erected a wall of roses to block the passage for her protection. Instead of being grateful, she only thought about her new dress left on the other side of the wall. It was a limited edition, the only one in the world. Her father had never been so speechless. His son had been injured defending her, and he wanted to suggest that she should be more understanding. But Gabrielle was not one to show gratitude. "It's just a small injury. A little ointment will fix it." Her father finally exploded. He had explicitly forbidden any outsiders recently, yet Gabrielle had still brought Chris in, and she was so inconsiderate. She was utterly incorrigible. He absolutely would not allow her to attend the ball. Watching her father's retreating back, Gabrielle was at a loss. Her father had actually yelled at her. Tears streamed down her face. Meanwhile, on the other side of the rose wall, Ceres remained calm. After confirming with May the date of the ball hosted by the Lower Branch family, she turned and went back to her room to sleep. Even with the doors and windows sealed shut, unable to leave, she wasn't panicked. Faced with such a composed master, May could only accept reality. She had been confined in this sunless place for 3 days now. She was ecstatic. Her mistress might be a bit intimidating, but she usually left her alone. Meals were delivered daily. She could enjoy baths and even secretly try on Gabrielle's clothes. Speaking of which, the Kalia family of the Summerwing clan also had someone like Gabrielle, a treasured daughter. Today happened to be her birthday. Since the young master was injured, he certainly wouldn't attend. It would likely be the head of the family who went. But unbeknownst to anyone, Ceres slipped out in her night clothes and bare feet. With a leap, she vanished from the rooftop. Since she was in a birthday party, how could she go without a gift? She entered a dungeon, the floor already littered with corpses. It seemed she was a step too late. Suddenly, several large men charged out, knives in hand. Seeing a woman, they looked at her with disdain. A tangle of vines suddenly shot out, only to recede back into stillness within 3 seconds. Ceres moved like a phantom deeper into the dungeon. As she opened the door, the sight of rubies scattered across the floor met her eyes. On a simple wooden cot lay a boy covered in wounds. Seeing Ceres arrive, he finally let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Please kill me. If you get this boy, you'll have the world. A drop of his blood becomes a ruby, a tear a diamond. In the eyes of others, the boy was a living, breathing money tree. Imprisoned, he yearned for death, yet couldn't even find that solace. His name is Mag. He's from the lower branch, the only child of the Kaliya family to inherit their unique ability. He's meant to be the future king of Kaliya. Upon seeing Ceres, Mag didn't beg for rescue, but for release. Kill me, please, I beg you. Ceres saw a reflection of her own past helplessness in his desperate plea. She granted his request. The boy, a flicker of peace in his eyes, shed a tear. He was finally going to die. The tear struck the ground, transforming into a diamond. Ceres picked it up. The boy's whispered thanks filled the air. Don't thank me yet. If you still want to die when you're safe, then I'll kill you. With that, she swallowed the diamond whole and broke the chains binding the boy's hands. My name is Ceres. Remember it. Just as she was about to lift Mag into her arms, an uninvited guest arrived. The man radiated an almost palpable aura of power. He was here for the boy, catching the lingering scent of roses in the air. He knew this woman was from the Iniden family. Since their goals seemed aligned, he requested she hand the boy over. Ceres gave him a cold stare. And what makes me believe you're the head of the Beljet family? Ixion. That name should suffice. Ceres remained silent. This scene mirrored her past life with chilling accuracy. Last time, she had accepted his offer. This time, she would walk her own path. Opening her palm, she unleashed her power. Forgive me. Until next time, in a blink, she vanished into thin air, Mag cradled in her arms. Meanwhile, the ball was in full swing. Ceres' father was furious. Her future son-in-law complained about being unable to visit his fiancée's home. He lamely excused Ceres' absence as mere capriciousness and, with astounding audacity, twisted the truth of Ceres' awakened ability, claiming it was his son, Kalido, who possessed it. Fortunately, Chris wasn't a fool. Regardless of the truth, he still wanted to replace his future wife and her father. The older man felt a shame unlike any he had ever known. How could a family betrothal be so easily disregarded? He extended a vine, a dark intent taking root. Chris's words stopped him short. I saw with my own eyes who wielded that power. Why, as her father, would you fabricate such a lie? Seeing his future father-in-law's unwavering insistence, Chris could do nothing but anticipate the day the Iniden leadership changed hands. He would be the first to offer his congratulations then. But the old man's obsession was too deeply ingrained. He was consumed with transferring his daughter's abilities to his son. He was about to be proven drastically wrong. Just as laughter and conversation filled the air, a shower of rose petals rained down, accompanied by a powerful gust of wind. Chaos erupted in the ballroom. A woman, dressed entirely in pink, slowly descended, a boy cradled in her arms. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. She had dared to appear in her night clothes. Only Chris recognized her. The woman in green, however, was filled with confusion. It wasn't until she saw the ruby that tumbled to her feet that she recognized the boy in Ceres' arms as their family's lost treasure. He was the current sole heir to the Kaliya family. Velita Ceres called out the woman's name. This is my birthday gift to you. This time, please be sure to protect her. After handing the child to Viota, she transformed into a flurry of rose petals and vanished into the banquet hall. Those present were still trying to understand what had happened when another man appeared, wreathed in black energy. Too late, he thought. The woman he wanted to see was already gone. However, he spotted Iniden in the crowd. Head of the family, I apologize. It seems you've already found a successor in my absence. Now the whole world knew that the heir to the Iniden family was not Caleb. Just how large was the shadow cast over the old father's heart at this moment? His daughter, whose heart was full of family, was unloved. Things had to come to such an unpleasant state. The man was furious that his daughter had disrupted the banquet. His plan to make his son the heir was now ruined. Yet his daughter still had the appetite to eat. He slammed his fist on the dining table, demanding a reasonable explanation. Ceres watched the spilled wine, speechless. Even a dog wouldn't disturb its master's meal. This is so annoying. I just went to deliver a birthday gift. Is there a problem with that? The old father's face darkened. Countless vines erupted around him. He had to teach this arrogant daughter a lesson. Ceres wasn't flustered. The vines at her feet swiftly launched a counterattack, as if she didn't possess abilities of her own. As the two sets of rose vines intertwined, her father clearly felt his strength waning. His own power seemed to be continuously draining away. His roses gradually withered. Ceres smirked. It was a good thing she had consumed that diamond earlier. Calikia's tears. Everyone knew that carrying it could slightly enhance one's abilities, but they didn't know its true power was unleashed by consuming it. Not only would one's abilities be greatly amplified, but it also allowed one to absorb the power of others. This secret was known only to the Kalia family. Her father collapsed on the ground, helpless as a child. He couldn't believe what had just happened. As long as one's power was strong enough, there was no need for him to designate an heir. The family brand would appear on Ceres on its own. She looked at her father with the air of a victor. It seems there are times when you're useful, father. Although this family is full of trash, the position of head of the family still has some use. From today onwards, I am the head of this household. I'll work hard until I die. Her father was both furious and terrified. He no longer had any right to object. Her brother, Kalido, however, still hadn't grasped the situation. Naively, he demanded his sister apologize to their father. Otherwise, I won't let you off the hook. Ceres tilted her head. And how exactly won't you let me off the hook? Kalido opened his mouth, but couldn't find a retort. Finally, he could only lower his head in shame. From now on, this family is under my control. Anyone who disagrees can get out. Ceres knew her brother didn't have the courage. Looking at the scene before her, Gabrielle, the little manipulator, was panicked. How would she maintain her footing in this family now? The current outcome was actually rather lenient. Back in the 7th iteration, Ceres had slaughtered this entire family. Nausea welled up in her stomach. She had never regretted anything so much. Why, after so many times, did she still feel sorry for these people? Pull yourself together, she thought. She would accomplish everything she hadn't been able to in her past lives, all in this one. But before that, she needed to buy some clothes. Roy agreed wholeheartedly. I'll go make the preparations now. Yet there was always someone to spoil the mood. Caleb shamelessly tried to curry favor with Ceres, flattering his sister, and adding clothes to the pile. If sister catches a cold, I'll be heartbroken. Roy stared, dumbfounded. What was he even witnessing? And it didn't end there. Caleb widened his eyes, putting on a cutesy act, wanting to have tea and chat with his sister. Unexpectedly, Ceres answered readily, granting permission for her brother to do as he pleased. Gabrielle, seizing the opportunity, immediately requested the same tea as her sister. Ceres, however, ignored her, instead inquiring of Roy whether her planned outing needed to be postponed. There was no need for Ceres to stand. She would depart immediately. Roy and Gabrielle were caught in a whirlwind of rose petals, momentarily blinded. When they could see again, Ceres had vanished. The two were stunned. Their mistress had run off again, still in her nightgown. A nightgown adorned with roses and accompanied by inexplicable magical effects. The nightgown-clad, rose-petal-wreathed young woman became the hottest topic of conversation in the Empire, piquing the interest of Ixion. He had been plagued by dreams of a girl laughing maniacally, a girl with a chilling laugh, murdering with terrifying ease. It wasn't until he encountered Ceres that he finally recognized the girl from his dreams. He was eager to visit Ceres' home with his friend, but Violetta warned him to stay away from a girl. Becoming entangled with her, she insisted, would lead to certain regret. Because I've seen something in her, she explained. Ixion, however, was not afraid. His interest was only further ignited. He soon found the perfect excuse to visit Ceres' home. Mag, the young heir who had been unconscious for over a fortnight, had finally awakened. Having been tormented for so long, he now trusted no one. Members of the Kalia family possessed eyes that could discern truth from falsehood. But these eyes could not penetrate those who also possessed the eyes of truth. Mag was terrified, unable to determine whether Violetta was being truthful. He cried and pleaded to see Ceres, the sister who seemed the most pure, the most genuine person he had ever met. Violetta was growing anxious. The letter she had sent requesting a visit had yet to receive a reply. Her cousin, sensing her distress, ignored her protests and insisted on taking Mag to see the sister he so desperately longed for. Violetta, of course, refused. She would rather trust an outsider than the elder's lackeys. Fortunately, Ixion was present, observing the dejected cousins and the trembling boy in the bed. He easily grasped the situation. Hearing Violetta's desire to take her nephew to Ceres, Ixion approved. Turning to Mag, he spoke in the manner of one man to another. I swear on the name of Beljet, no matter what happens, I will protect you. He was not a member of the Kalia family. Mag instantly recognized the sincerity in his words and chose to trust him without hesitation. Truly unimaginable. Let us depart at once. Meanwhile, Ceres found herself in an awkward predicament. Due to a miscalculation in her teleportation, she materialized inside the dressing room of a clothing store. Several noble women were startled by her sudden appearance, and the room was left in disarray from the gust of wind that accompanied her arrival. However, Ceres was not short on funds. She ordered that every garment in the store be remade to her size, covering the cost of all the damaged merchandise. Simply bill the Inadin family's accounts, she instructed, much to the shopkeeper's delight. Without further ado, Ceres teleported again, this time to the royal court. This was the place built by the first demigod king, where the 4 great families and the nobles held their councils. Within the court were 99 doors, each leading to a different dimension. The 44th door, for instance, led to the underground prison where Ceres had once been held. This time, she had come for the court's most unique feature, the 99th door, which led to the Four Seasons Forest. This door could only be opened with the presence of 2 heads of the 4 great families. Ceres retrieved a ruby from her pocket. She had saved Mag specifically to open this door. However, the gem alone was insufficient. According to the plan, a member of the Kalia family should have been invited to accompany her. He couldn't resist the urge to try it out, but just then, Chris appeared. It was the day of their family meeting. Seeing Ceres wandering around in her pajamas again, he immediately took off his coat and draped it over her. You'll catch a cold, and I'd hate for that to happen. Chris and Gabrielle were truly 2 peas in a pod. Their actions and words were identical, always running into these drama queens. It was truly sickening. Ceres shrugged off the coat. Sorry, I'm not going home with you. A man's words are deceitful lies. I love you. Come home with me. You're the only one in my heart. Something obtained too easily was destined to be uncherished. The man preyed on Ceres' vulnerability, her craving for affection. He brought her home, showering her with warmth and care she had never known. Ceres was blinded by the illusion. She felt like the luckiest woman in the world. Even if people called her a fool, it didn't matter. As long as she had love, it was enough. She poured her heart and soul into Chris, only to receive coldness and deceit in return. Chris had pampered her, but only to use her womb to bear a powerful hybrid baby. This meant that once the child was born, she would no longer matter. She might even be killed. Overhearing the truth, she was terrified. Chris acted as if nothing was wrong, showering her with feigned concern. Did you hear that? Yes. He had deliberately left the door open for Ceres to hear. Even if she heard, so what? She would still love him like a fool. Sometimes, the more humble the love, the deeper the wound. But this time, I hate you. Ceres wanted nothing more to do with this man. Chris couldn't understand. Just a while ago, she had looked at him with dreamy eyes. Perhaps I've woken up from my dream. As she spoke, Ceres activated her power, transforming into rose petals and vanishing before his eyes. Some things become more desirable the more unattainable they are. Rejected twice by the same woman, Chris wasn't angry. Instead, he found himself genuinely falling for her. Ceres had just arrived home to find a group of guests waiting. They were Violetta, Ixion, and Violetta's fiancé and cousin, Terzo. Mag, overjoyed to see Ceres, lunged forward and threw his arms around her. Clinging tightly, Violetta apologized. If I may, I'd like to greet the head of the Inadin family first. That won't be necessary. From now on, I'm the family's representative. Ceres calmly informed them. Though surprised, everyone remained silent. She was curious. Ixion, why have you come with someone from the Kalia family? Ixion grinned. He was here to say hello, because of what Ceres had said in the dungeon last time. And the purpose of their visit was to offer Mag some sense of security through Ceres. The child had no trust in his own family. Mag's mother was Violetta's sister, Unhappy with her arranged marriage, she had been banished and disappeared without a trace. Consequently, no one knew she had given birth. Violetta took out a necklace with her sister's picture, trying to jog Mag's memory. But Mag had no recollection of his mother, not even her name. Violetta felt a pang of sadness. What had this child been through? She clasped Mag's small hand tightly. From now on, no one will ever hurt you again. I will protect you with my life and give you the best care. She hoped Mag would try to trust her. Mag, unsure whether to believe her, turned and whispered to Ceres. They had a pact. Ceres hadn't forgotten. She would return Mag to Kalisha and he would start a new life. And if, after all that, he still wanted to die, she would keep her promise and kill him. Mag didn't understand what had happened to Ceres. He kept seeing strange things. But you're the only one who understands me, right, Ceres? Even Ceres wasn't sure. If you think so, then it must be true. A light flickered in Mag's eyes. Tears welled up in Ceres's eyes once more. She had promised to return to Kalisha. So this child's name was Mag Ixion. She picked up the diamond at her feet. Judging by Ceres's actions in the dungeon, she seemed to have known the child's exact location and his name all along. Miss Ceres, can you tell me why? These are tears of happiness, shed only for those I care about. Eat one, and you'll become even stronger. This secret is only known to the Kalisha family. Not even little Mag's existence was known outside the family. Yet Lady Ceres found and rescued him without any effort. It's hard not to be suspicious. Everyone's afraid she's hoarding the gems. No one can lie before the eye of truth. But it doesn't matter to Ceres. She learned of Mag's existence by chance, and there really isn't a hidden gem in the family. Violetta was still doubtful, but regardless, she saved my nephew. We must repay her. Ceres hadn't expected the opportunity to come so quickly. She wanted to invite the head of the Kalisha family to the Four Seasons forest in the royal court. Unfortunately, the head of the Kalisha family was in poor health and might not agree. Ceres said there was no need to force it, but inwardly she panicked. What if she was refused? No matter the means, she had to get to the Four Seasons forest. Why do you have to go with the head of the Kalisha family? Ixion didn't understand. If it's just about getting in, wouldn't I be the best choice? The three, who had never interacted much before, now looked like a family. Ceres had only met Ixion once, at a ball when she was 12. Though only 15 at the time, he was already the head of the Beljet family. The boy's chilling aura had frightened Ceres so much she hadn't dared to meet his gaze. Their first encounter hadn't involved much interaction. Ceres had no reason to refuse. Ever since she had become the head of the family, her father had been bedridden and her brother had shut himself away in his study. Gabrielle continued to be a sycophant. Sister, you don't have to worry about anything. I'll look after father and brother. Everything was settled. She immediately informed the four great families. It was time to announce Inadin's will. In the blink of an eye, the appointed day arrived. Ceres looked at the person at the top of the stairs, a whirlwind of emotions swirling within her. It was much like her past life, only their positions were reversed. Ixion felt a similar sense of déjà vu. The rose scent emanating from Ceres struck him as dangerous, but it didn't stop them from holding hands as they entered the Four Seasons forest. Entry required physical contact between two family heads. Our sister hasn't even been inside. But whatever, it is what it is. The moment their hands touched, Chris appeared. He looked as if someone had stolen his bride. He was curious why they were together. Ixion took Ceres' hand. Let's go now. We'll have to do this again when we come out. He completely ignored Chris. It seemed their relationship was exceptionally poor. Their intimacy infuriated Chris, but that no longer mattered to Ceres. All she wanted was to find a way to die. In her 7th life, a close friend had told her about the Four Seasons forest. There's a history book here, a record of the 4 great families. There are even hidden, forbidden texts. Maybe they hold the key to his rebirth. But back then, he wasn't the head of the family. He never had the chance to enter the Four Seasons forest until he died. This time, he finally made it inside. But why is this place so beautiful? He came here looking for death. The way he adjusts his tie, it really tugs at my heartstrings. He seems fierce and intimidating. But he's actually a good person, cold on the outside, warm on the inside. And he's quite the charmer. Hearing that Ceres was going to the Four Seasons forest, he knew he had to be there. He explains everything about the forest to Ceres without hesitation. There are 5 doors inside. Which ones you can enter, which ones you can't, where the resting area is. He explains it all clearly. Ceres senses his unexpected warmth. "You're a really good person." These words deeply touch Ixion's heart. Perhaps it's the first time he's heard such words. But none of that matters now. Reborn 8 times, Ceres just wants to find a way to end it all quickly. But after scouring the diaries of past family heads, all he finds are complaints about friends, boasts about lovers, and the usual vain comparisons between nobles. Nothing useful at all. As he emerges, looking at the Summer Clan's records, he suddenly recalls Ixion's warning. Without the other family heads present, these rooms are forbidden to outsiders. Perhaps what he seeks lies within. He reaches out his hand, and sure enough, there's a barrier of lightning. But the more mysterious it is, the more tempting it becomes. Ceres extends his hand, activating his power to counter the barrier. Sparks fly, crackling with energy. Ixion suddenly grabs him from behind, his expression grave as he warns him. He himself once ignored the advice of a companion and ended up badly injured, without success. That companion now looks at him with terror every time they meet. Ceres is curious about who this person might be. When he hears the name, he bursts out laughing. It was his father. His laughter pierces Ixion's heart, as if he's seen something he shouldn't have. Just as they're about to leave, Ceres notices the inscription on a nearby stone tablet. "Those who enter the king's sanctuary, prove yourselves chosen." Like a curious child, he has to try everything himself. Hearing Ceres mutter under his breath, Ixion has a bad feeling. Sure enough, when he turns around, Ceres has already cut off a lock of his hair. Seeing that the hair has no effect, he offers his palm to the vines. By the time Ixion tries to stop him, he's already cut his hand. Blood drips onto the stone tablet. Ixion grabs his hand tightly. "What are you doing?" "Just curious," Ceres replies calmly, unfazed. "Do you have to try everything yourself?" Ixion feels a pang of concern. He hears Ceres ask him to let go, afraid he'll get blood on him. "It'll heal," he sighs. "She's truly a handful." He pulls off his black tie. "Excuse me," he murmurs, expertly bandaging the wound. "I'm just that kind of person. Don't worry about it." But how could he not? Perhaps from this point on, their bond will only deepen. By the time they emerge, dusk has fallen. Ixion asks a startling question. "Haven't we met here before?" "At dusk, just the two of us." He looks down, perhaps aware of how absurd he sounds. Ceres' fists clench involuntarily. Did he miss here? Or does Ixion also remember their past life? He couldn't compose himself. He wanted to get away from there, quickly. Perhaps you were mistaken. After expressing his gratitude, he hastily disappeared. Ixion felt a pang of disappointment. Was it truly a mistake? How many families have been ruined by the preference for sons? His daughter had awakened the family's hereditary ability. Yet, her father, driven mad by this, was obsessed with ensuring his son inherited the position of head of the family. Every day, he forced his daughter to take untested drugs, desperate to transfer her ability to his son. Ceres, desperate for even a sliver of her father's affection, took the medicine despite its alarmingly vivid red color and the unease it stirred within her. Her father insisted it was the only way to transfer the ability to her brother. Even if it was poison, she would endure it. At first, she did feel her power waning, and she felt a strange sense of relief. However, her health deteriorated rapidly. Nosebleeds became frequent. She knew she wouldn't last much longer. Yet, her father only cared that her power hadn't fully disappeared. He grabbed a handful of the pills and shoved them into her mouth. This blood was hard to come by. Not a single drop can be wasted. Only then did Ceres realize it wasn't medicine at all, but Kalisha blood. Unable to withstand the overwhelming potency, she finally died on a cold morning. This was Ceres' tragic third life. She had assumed she was the only one with memories of past lives. But Ixion's words earlier, "Haven't we met before?" left her shaken. If it were true, she knew she couldn't see him again. Meanwhile, the invitation for Ceres to inherit the family headship reached Chris's father. He raged at his useless son. Why had he chosen that good-for-nothing, low-born girl? A bottle of ink went flying, splattering Chris. He listened to his father's tirade, speechless but unangered. After all, who had chosen his wife for him? His father. He had simply obeyed, playing the dutiful son. His father grew even angrier. If Chris had listened to him and married earlier, he'd have a house full of grandchildren by now. Chris smiled pleasantly. He wasn't about to settle for just any wife. What if he ended up with a defective child like his father? His father, consumed by rage, disowned him. "Then I'll call you elder brother from now on," Chris quipped. His father, furious, grabbed a bottle of wine. The sounds of crashing glass echoed from the room. The house servants seemed unfazed. The head of the Toji family was always sickly, unable even to produce an heir. He'd had to adopt his younger brother as his successor. Chris had never taken him seriously. Yet, this lowborn girl had suddenly appeared. But Chris no longer needed him. Feigning a twisted ankle, he allowed himself to be carried out. Ceres' sudden ascension to the leadership of Inadin caught Chris completely off guard. He recalled their trip to the Four Seasons forest that day. He'd felt a sense of danger unlike any he'd experienced before. After all, she was the leader of a different race, and he was still nothing. He had to climb to a position equal to hers. A plan began to form in his mind. Meanwhile, after Ceres sent out her letters, she was suddenly inundated with newfound relatives. She'd initially instructed her butler to send them away. There was no need to entertain these scavenging dogs, but they barged in anyway. "Ceres, darling, how have you been?" They acted as if they owned the place, showering her with flattery. "We always knew you were the one who would blossom. I've always thought of you as my own daughter." They were outraged that the butler had tried to dismiss them. He would have to be taught a lesson. It was worth noting that these were the same people who had previously fawned over Corrido. Just then, a servant announced the arrival of the head of the Ferrano family. This family held a prominent position among the Inadin's subordinate families. They were likely unaware of Ceres' new status and were probably there to see her father, Diego. Ceres instructed the servant to bring him in, which only drew further ire from her relatives. Did she think they were invisible? Ceres scoffed. "You barged in here without my permission. How dare you accuse me of being rude?" Her expression hardened, eyes flashing. "Get out now, or don't blame me for what happens next." This was probably the easiest motherhood gig in existence. All the burdens of the household fell squarely on her son's shoulders. Having angered her husband with her incessant smoking, she decided to escape to her son's office for a few puffs. This time, however, she had an agenda. The elders were all hoping her son would marry Ceres. If marriage wasn't on the table, that was fine, but a courtship was absolutely mandatory. She'd given birth to such a handsome son. It would be a shame to waste his potential for romance. Ixion could only sigh inwardly at his mother's antics. But when it came to marriage, Ceres was rather special. He set aside his work. It was time to go find his wife. Meanwhile, Ceres was suffering a headache induced by her clamoring relatives. Telling them to leave was like speaking to a brick wall. They apologized profusely, but their backsides remained firmly planted. Norton, the head of the Ferrano family, entered at that moment. Seeing the guests, he apologized and turned to leave. Ceres stopped him. She penned a handwritten letter of appointment. "From this moment forward, I appoint you as my acting representative." The family head's mark, clearly visible, proved Ceres' authority. This was something none of the relatives had anticipated. Norton dropped to one knee. Hail, the new head of the family. Accepting the letter meant he now held the highest authority, second only to the head of the family. He was overwhelmed with a mixture of awe and trepidation. The relatives, however, were far from pleased. How could such a plum position be given to an outsider? Their outraged cries filled the room. Ceres, losing her patience, activated her ability, binding them hand and foot. In the blink of an eye, they vanished, their destination unknown. She sent a message along with them. "Consider this a warning. Disobey me again, and the consequences will be far worse." She believed Norton was the most suitable candidate for the role, and she wouldn't tolerate refusal, whether in this life or her past one. Only Norton had consistently treated her with respect, never showing favoritism based on personal preference. Ceres had fought for the position of family head only to make it easier to find a way to die. Norton, trembling slightly, swore to fulfill his duties. He couldn't possibly have guessed that Ceres had chosen him simply because she found the whole business tiresome. Diego, her father, soon arrived, blustering and fuming. How dare she meet with someone outside the family without his permission? He was still alive. The betrayal by his own family enraged him. Ignoring the servant's pleas, he stormed into the drawing room, still cursing Ceres' name. The next second, he froze. Why was Ixion here? He claimed he'd come to arrange a future meeting with Ceres. The excuse was flimsy at best. For such a trivial matter, a simple message would have sufficed. Why the need for a personal visit? But he'd been afraid Ceres wouldn't reply, so he'd rushed over in person. Roy, eavesdropping nearby, perked up his ears. There was definitely something going on between these two. He felt like he'd stumbled upon some juicy gossip. Ixion had been restless since arriving, and had even bothered to wear a tie. Now, not only had he arranged a meeting with Ceres in 2 days, but he was also expressing concern over her injured hand. Hearing that she hadn't seen a doctor, Ixion's expression darkened. "I know you might find this strange," he said, "but I can't help but worry about you." Ceres maintained a calm facade, but inside her heart was pounding. The atmosphere crackled with a sudden, undeniable tension. Then Diego barged in, shattering the moment. The air thickened with awkwardness. "What are you doing here?" Ixion looked like he wanted to punch him. He grinned. "Hello, former head." Diego was furious. Being called former head stung. Yet he had to endure it. After all, he was nothing now. "I heard you were ill. Are you well enough to be out of bed now? But you're interrupting me by barging in like this." Shouldn't the former head take his leave? Not only was the man handsome, but he was also fiercely protective of his wife. His sharp tongue was especially potent when directed at his father-in-law. Shouldn't the former head leave now? Diego had no choice but to slink away. He only dared to act tough within the family. The whole scene was incredibly amusing. Ceres enjoyed seeing her father like this. Ixion was in high spirits. The two of them seemed oddly well-suited. That day, Ceres visited the head of the Kalisha family, Renee. Due to his advanced age and poor health, Renee had invited Ceres to his home. The moment she stepped inside, young Morrow came rushing over and threw himself into Ceres' arms. Renee apologized for not being able to accompany Morrow to the Four Seasons forest. After all, Ceres had saved his grandson's life. He expressed his hope that Ceres would visit Morrow more often, clearly hinting at his desire for her to become his granddaughter-in-law. Before Ceres left, Morrow tugged on her sleeve, whispering in her ear, "I haven't told anyone. If you want my shoes, you can have them. But only you." He was referring to Ceres consuming his tears. Ceres was grateful, but assured him that his goodwill was enough. Morrow's earlier strange behavior, however, still troubled Violetta. They had clearly never met Ceres before, yet they addressed her by name with familiarity and urged her to protect Morrow. Coupled with the vision she had witnessed, there were too many unanswered questions. Yet, she couldn't ask. She felt it wasn't the right time. She still wanted to be friends with Ceres, though. Just then, Terzo and the elders arrived. The older men immediately launched into a flurry of compliments, expressing their high regard for Ceres. Upon learning she was 19, they remarked on how well-suited she and Morrow seemed. Ceres realized these old foxes were trying to set her up with Morrow. "I'm sorry, I have to go." The elders tried to stop her, but only relented when Violetta showed her displeasure. Changing tactics, they then insisted Terzo escort Ceres. Both women were speechless. If the younger one wouldn't do, they'd try with an older one, Violetta's fiancé, no less. But this wasn't the only troubling matter. The sacred chalice was missing, a gift from the king to the head of Inaden. It was considered a family heirloom, passed down through generations. It was the goblet used by each successive head of the family during their inauguration. Everyone was at a loss. The chalice was always kept under lock and key in the vault. Only Ceres, her father, and Corrido had keys. Considering the events of the past few days, it was easy to deduce who was responsible. Ceres went to her father's room, but she wasn't there to see him. Ignoring his angry shouts from behind, she went straight to the bookshelf and forcefully moved the green box on the shelf. With a click, a hidden room was revealed. Diego stared in disbelief. He had never told anyone about it. Of course, Ceres knew. It was the place where her father had imprisoned her in her past lives. No matter how many times she saw it, the sight filled her with revulsion. And there, as expected, was the chalice. She thought her father was pathetic. He genuinely believed that without the chalice, she would cancel the celebratory banquet. Diego trembled with rage. That chalice, this position as head, none of it belongs to you. He still couldn't accept reality. But what did it matter? Everything in Inaden would be hers. Ceres warned her father. The less Corrido understands his situation, the less of a place he has in this family. If you can't find the right person, marry me. Watching best friends tear each other apart is pretty entertaining. But this kind of Yuri pairing is pretty appealing too. The girl's name is Cordelia. She and Violetta grew up together. For the sake of her family's interests, she chose a political marriage with Violetta's cousin, Vincent. Even though her cousin is a good person, Violetta still feels sorry for her friend. After all, spending your whole life with someone you're not in love with, that's the tragedy of being born into nobility. He took Cordelia's hand. No matter who you ultimately choose, I hope you be happy. If you have regrets, the two of you should just be together. I just want to say, author, please lock these two together for me. Recently, Violetta has found another friend she wants to get close to. It's Ceres, the new head of Inaden. They seem to get along really well. Violetta really likes her. This makes her best friend incredibly jealous. While the two of them are chatting and laughing, no one cares about another poor soul. The elders all want Maro to marry Ceres. Because he's still quite young, Terzo has become the backup plan. It wasn't long ago that they valued his marriage with Violetta so highly. But being born into such a family, he's used to this kind of thing, and Maro's appearance has disrupted his plans. He still has the Kalisha blood in his possession. Thinking of those who live in the sunlight, he gave a sinister smile. A conspiracy is quietly unfolding. Inside the Inaden castle, Ceres discovered a secret. There seemed to be a flow of power within the sacred chalice. She suspected it held other functions. What would happen if I infused it with my own power? Thinking this, she acted on it, but it was completely useless. Besides looking exquisite, it was nothing. Norton found her at that moment. He brought his son, Enrique, with him. He was there to report on his work. He had his son come while he was away. Enrique, however, covered his nose, his face flushed. Did you just use your divine power? Ceres was puzzled. Is there a problem? She hadn't realized the lingering fragrance on her would have such an effect on others. Ixion had also mentioned her scent was dangerous before. Speak of the devil. Roy came looking for her with a freshly clean tie. It was Ixion's, the one she'd used to bandage his wound. She'd only just remembered she hadn't returned it. Roy suggested buying a new one would be better, but thinking of Ixion's concerned expression, she wanted to run far away. Some memories are best kept in the heart. Since she became the head of the family, Corrido's appearances have been fewer. He reappeared at a gathering of noble young men. The strange atmosphere made him nervous. His friend Ormond's enthusiasm put him at ease. His friend then recommended a new wine that had just arrived, but he never drank at these gatherings. Can we still call you the Rose Prince? Ormond suddenly sneered. After all, the Rose's owner isn't him anymore. These words hit Corrido like a bolt of lightning, leaving him numb. Ceres was never mentioned at these gatherings before, but now every other sentence was about her. His friends were all eager to meet her, asking Corrido to make introductions. Mondo saw his discomfort. We didn't mean any harm. We hope you don't take it to heart. You're still the center of our group. How ironic those words were. But what could he do? No matter how many times I relive it, the sickening truth remains. Terrible people are always terrible. Only this time, Ceres, the heroine, has become the center of attention. Invitations from nobles pour in. Among them are Ormond and Helena, who are about to hold an anniversary party for their engagement. A grave incident will occur that day. It all stems from the vanity of the nobles. The clock ticks towards 11 p.m. It's time to act. A basement is filled with oil. Cages are crammed with red-eyed monsters. They need to be disposed of before Kalisha and Brigat's people discover them. Clearly, they intend to destroy the evidence. Suddenly, footsteps echo. Before anyone can react, two men drop dead. Looking at the ferocious monsters in the cages, Ceres feels a pang of empathy. If it weren't for Kalisha's blood, they wouldn't be in this state. She remembers her fourth life. Back then, her father, Diego, was relatively kind to her. So, she told him everything she had experienced. "You're crazy," he'd said, refusing to believe her. Instead, he locked her in a room. Just like in her third life, he found Kalisha's blood. "I know this medicine is made from blood. If I take it, I'll die. Are you really so cruel as to make me go through this again?" Ceres clung to a sliver of hope, but reality dealt her a harsh blow. Not only did her father think she was lying, but he also believed that even if she died, it would prove the medicine's effectiveness. "For the family, take it and see," he'd said, as if it were the most reasonable thing in the world. This time, Ceres certainly wouldn't obediently take the medicine. She hoped that if it had no effect, her father would give up. But one day, two maidservants suddenly restrained her. Her father had lost his patience. He directly injected Kalisha's blood into her body. Unfortunately, this method worked. Even more unfortunately, her body began to mutate. Her family was terrified by her transformation. Everyone in the house called her a monster. She was in agony, desperately begging her brother, Corrido, for help. Corrido, feeling a pang of sympathy, said he would think of something. Ceres was overwhelmed with gratitude. But until the moment she died, her brother brother never came back. She could only blame herself for being so naive. These monsters were probably waiting for someone to save them too, but they had to die. I'll give you a swift end. Vines tightly coiled around the monsters. These creatures were deformed monstrosities created by Kalisha's blood. They possessed immortal bodies. However, they also had a weakness. Destroying the Kalisha core within them would deliver a fatal blow. Based on her past lives, Ceres knew Brigatte's people would soon find this place. The existence of these deformed monsters would cause chaos. She didn't want it to interfere with her plans. But even if she failed, it didn't matter. She still had her tiresome premonitions. By the time Ixion arrived, all that remained was a burned-out ruin. They had finally found this place, only to find the evidence deliberately destroyed. Looking at the charred remains of the massive monsters, Ixion felt a sense of unease, though he couldn't quite place it. He soon discovered the monsters' shattered cores. They hadn't been burned to death. The scene felt strangely familiar, as if he had experienced it before. The faint scent of Ceres's roses lingered in the air. Was it a conspiracy, or had she truly been here? It seemed he would have to investigate thoroughly. The little schemer had become a little victim today. She'd left the house excitedly, only to return in tears. She had run into Ormond and Helena. "Miss Ceres, will you be attending our engagement anniversary party?" Ceres's face burned with embarrassment. She hadn't heard of it, nor had she received an invitation. Helena, feigning kindness, invited him to the party. "We want as many well-wishers as possible," she said, just as Corrido was about to accept, breaking his usual pattern. "You don't have to force yourself if it's too difficult. Are you worried about it being awkward with your sister there?" Helena taunted. Corrido realized he'd been played. His lack of Innoden blood had become a glaring weakness, a target for their barbs. Tears pricked at his eyes. He was close to crying. "Sister Ceres loves me very much," he thought miserably. He didn't want to speak to either of them anymore. As he walked away, he could still hear Helena and her husband fawning over Ceres. Though Corrido found him detestable, he couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy for him now. The night of the party arrived quickly. Ceres, the subject of everyone's gossip, was a vision in a pink, off-the-shoulder gown with a white shawl. The chattering of the socialites was a constant buzz, overwhelming her. "Miss Ceres." Enrique greeted her respectfully. Ceres was surprised that he not only remembered her, but also addressed her by her full name. He eagerly offered to take her shawl. Ceres tilted her head. "Isn't that a servant's job?" "It's my duty," Enrique insisted. Ceres relented and handed him the shawl. "You don't have to do this next time." "Then can I be a little greedier? I want to stay by your side tonight." Enrique was pushing his luck. Ceres was speechless. Thankfully, Chris arrived, though his presence wasn't much of an improvement. He shared Enrique's intentions and brought up their last encounter. "Did you get home safely last time?" he asked, glancing at Enrique with a smug look. His smugness was quickly deflated. "Thanks to Lord Brigatte's care," Ceres replied, unwilling to give either of them any satisfaction. Helena and her husband witnessed the awkward scene. "Did you two plan to arrive together?" Helena asked. "No, we just happened to run into each other," Ceres replied, emphasizing the word happened. The party began in a strained atmosphere. Once ignored, Ceres was now surrounded by people trying to curry favor. Maintaining a constant fake smile was exhausting. Just like in her past life, Violetta and Cordelia arrived. "Both of the ranked knights have come," she observed. The evening's dramatic events would involve both of them. Violetta had been looking forward to seeing Ceres for days. But after only a brief exchange, Ceres excused herself. Chris was equally disappointed. Ceres had deliberately mentioned Ixion in front of him and acted close to her household staff. Already irritated, Corrido then found him. Corrido immediately began berating him for attending the party without telling his fiancée, making him feel embarrassed. "You and I have already broken off our engagement. We're nothing now," Chris stated coldly, urging him to go home and avoid further humiliation. Corrido was stunned. He hadn't known about the broken engagement. He grabbed Chris's arm. "You're just being petulant. You're joking. That's what my father told me," Chris said with an icy expression. He was in a foul mood. "If you keep pestering me, you'll only embarrass yourself further." Not only was his father biased, but his brother was too, ridiculously so. Hearing a scream, his first thought was of his adopted sister. It was Ormond's party, and he hadn't wanted to come, not having received an invitation. But his father had insisted he attend to keep an eye on Ceres. Preoccupied, he ran into Ormond on his way to find Corrido. He offered his sincere congratulations, which Ormond seemed to appreciate. Forgetting the lesson from the previous gathering, he decided to greet his friend's parents. He quickly realized his mistake. Ormond advised him against it. Ceres is here, he warned. He said it was for his own good. I don't want to be the laughingstock at my own engagement party. Even a fool could tell that was a dig. Corrido was furious. Years of friendship, all for nothing. Suddenly, a roar ripped through the courtyard. Ormond bolted off, frantic, to find his fiancée. Then came a woman's scream. Corrido froze. It sounded like it came from inside the house. Just moments before, while the two men had been talking, the courtyard had been bustling with activity. Helena shook a small bell. Everyone gather round. I have a special gift for you all on this special day. Although it's quite an ordinary thing, Ixion felt a prickle of unease. He'd heard it was a rare magical beast. As the crowd murmured with curiosity, Helena whipped the red cloth from the cage. Isn't it adorable? But what they saw was anything but adorable. A monstrous beast, jaws gaping, stared back at them. In the next instant, it burst free of the cage, its roar splitting the air. Panic erupted, the guests scattered. Chris, having never seen such a creature and mindful of the crowd, used his ability to freeze the beast, momentarily halting its rampage. He thought he had the situation under control. But before 3 seconds had passed, the monster shattered the ice. Its gaze locked onto Violetta. Terror seized her. She stood frozen. She watched, helpless, as the beast lunged. No, Cordelia cried out, reaching for her. At that critical moment, a coil of black energy lashed out, snaring the monster's jaws. The beast was completely immobilized, yet Ixion couldn't kill it. The harder it struggled, the more violent it became. What to do? Suddenly, the monster shrieked. A mysterious force pulverized its core. Ixion knew that power all too well. As expected of the leader of the Belgert, Ceres appeared, praising Ixion for slaying the beast. But both of them knew the truth. The power that had destroyed the monster belonged to the Enoidan family. Ceres, however, refused to acknowledge it. Another mystery gnawed at Ixion. As Ceres turned to leave, he impulsively grabbed Ceres' hand. In that instant, that strange feeling returned. It was like finding something long lost. His heart pounded in his chest. I'll come to your house tomorrow. The evening breeze ruffled Ceres' hair. Even with his usual scowl, he was beautiful. Whatever, Ceres said, pulling his hand free and turning away. Corrido was shouting for his brother, frantic with worry. He only relaxed when someone told him his brother had left earlier. Ixion witnessed the whole scene. The way you're carrying on, anyone would think Enoidan only has one son. The onlookers murmured amongst themselves. Corrido flushed crimson. But even then, he didn't mention Ceres' name. Ixion's heart ached for Ceres. He knew Ceres lacked a father's love, but he hadn't realized his own brother treated him this way. He wanted to live more than anything, yet he constantly contemplated suicide. In his 5th life, Ceres had fled his home, his father chasing after him, heartbroken. He didn't know where he was going. He just didn't want to be turned into a monster again. He loved his family desperately, but they made his life a living hell. He ran into the street and nearly collided with a carriage. Are you all right? A girl emerged from the carriage. It was Violetta, the princess of the Kalisha family. This was their first encounter. Ceres sat slumped on the ground. The girl looked familiar, but she couldn't place her. I must have frightened you, Violetta thought. The girl extended a hand towards her. Ceres grasped it like a lifeline. Help me. Violetta saw instantly that something was wrong, but her father suddenly appeared behind her. Don't bother people. We should go home. Ceres trembled with fear, remembering the torment that awaited her back home. She summoned all her strength to activate her powers for self-preservation. Perhaps from sheer exhaustion, she ultimately fainted. When she awoke, she was back home, locked in her room as before, forced to consume Kalisha's blood. The only difference was, this time, her prison was a secret chamber within her father, Diego's room. You stay put in here. Her father left her imprisoned. The silence made time feel non-existent, as if she had been forgotten. Just as she contemplated death, a glimmer of hope appeared. This is truly wicked. A man's voice offered solace. It's all right, Ceres. Ixion comforted her. I'll get you out of here. No matter how many times she relived her lives, she would never forget this moment. This seemingly unchanged 5th life was the beginning of her connection with Ixion. If it weren't for Violetta, she might have been locked away until her death. That's why she intervened at the ball, slaying the monster, to repay the debt she owed from this life. In the original course of events, Cordelia, protecting Violetta, would have suffered a deep wound across her back from the monster, and Violetta would have lost an eye, all because of the monsters created from Kalisha's blood. The monsters harbored an intense hatred for the Kalisha family. Even amidst the crowd, the monster had immediately targeted Violetta. Ceres empathized. She had once felt that same bone-deep hatred for the family. Ixion, still unaware of the circumstances, visited Ceres' home again. Her clueless father, Diego, emerged once more. "Why do you keep coming to see my daughter? I heard you too went to the Four Seasons forest. Isn't it inappropriate for a young man and woman to go there alone?" Outwardly expressing parental concern, he was, in reality, trying to prevent Ceres from returning to the Four Seasons forest. Ixion was momentarily taken aback. As an outsider, he didn't know what to say. How laughable. Ceres was amused by her father's performance. The man who never treated me like a daughter now puts on this charade. Diego attempted to defend himself with a smile. Ceres rose to her feet. Did he think she would play along with his act of fatherly affection just because a guest was present? He was sorely mistaken. "Please refrain from insulting my guest. You have no right." Tormented by her family for 7 lifetimes, she had developed a profound apathy. In her 8th rebirth, she chose to usurp her father's position as head of the family. Yet, her father remained unrepentant. To transfer his power to his son, Isin, he attempted to enter the Four Seasons forest, only to be thwarted by his daughter. Diego's paranoia flared. He believed his daughter intended to purge him of his power, shamelessly invoking his paternal authority in front of their guest. He tried to dissuade her from entering the Four Seasons forest again. He was met with immediate refusal. Enraged and humiliated, he instinctively raised his hand to strike her. However, the blow landed on Kirito's face. A surprising turn of events. Her brother, who had remained coldly indifferent, had unexpectedly taken the blow for her. "I'm so sorry," the brother stammered. "Father seems to have lost his mind. I apologize for this spectacle." Ceres remained impassive, her face a mask of cold indifference. She merely offered Ixion a look that spoke of shared embarrassment. Seeing Ixion hesitate, as if about to speak, she simply said, "Don't worry about it," and they arranged a time for their next meeting. Suddenly, he grasped her hand. "I swear, upon the name of Ixion, that from this day forward, I will do nothing to harm you, directly or indirectly." Such oaths, imbued with inherent power, carried severe consequences if broken. Yet Ixion uttered the words with a casualness that startled Ceres. He made this weighty vow simply to ease her mind. "You'll regret this," she warned. He only offered a reassuring smile in response. Ceres glanced back at her father. He had just revealed his family's secrets to an outsider, yet now he feigned indignation. It was truly laughable. "Father can't handle any stress," her brother interjected. "So it's best you stay in your room." Her father flinched at his son's words. He suspected his daughter was about to do something unusual. For once, his intuition was spot on. "Because you overstepped," Ceres stated, invoking the power of spring. A shimmering barrier materialized, encasing the 200-square-foot bedroom. "Anyone else can come and go," she continued, her voice level. "But not you, father. Don't worry," she added with a touch of irony. "You'll get used to it. I speak from experience." She turned and left without a backward glance. Her father, in disbelief, lunged for her, only to slam against an invisible wall with a resounding thud. "Don't worry, you'll get used to it. I have experience." Ceres departed, leaving no trace of her presence but the shimmering barrier. Her father, refusing to believe it, reached out to grab her, only to collide with the invisible wall with a jarring clang. Only then did he realize she wasn't joking. He'd never even heard of such a barrier. The appointed day to enter the Four Seasons forest arrived quickly. Ceres arrived early, but she wasn't the first. As usual, Ixion was already there, waiting in their usual spot. He lay on a sofa, hoping to snatch a moment of rest. But Ceres' image kept flashing through his mind. He found himself wondering what she was always searching for in the Spring Branch family archives. He thought back to their first meeting, and then to their first venture into the Four Seasons forest. "You're such a passionate person," Ceres had complimented him, and he'd felt a strange unease at her words. He wondered why he only seemed to show that passion around her. The heir's celebratory ball was fast approaching. He imagined being Ceres' escort, walking into the ballroom arm in arm. The thought made him smile, then chuckle at his own wishful thinking. By the time Ceres emerged, he had fallen asleep. She had intended to ask him if he knew of any hidden chambers in the archives, but seeing him sleeping so peacefully, she couldn't bring herself to disturb him. In the four families' shared archives, she randomly selected a book and stumbled upon a startling piece of information. The child born of the convergence of light and darkness became the first king of this land. To keep the king with them forever, the four families consumed his heart after his death. The image, no matter how she looked at it, was disturbing. But for now, she couldn't find any further details. She considered waking Ixion before leaving, but he seemed to be in distress. Was he having a nightmare? He kept muttering, "Don't go." Suddenly, he grabbed her hand. A flicker of emotion, something other than his usual impassiveness, crossed his face. Ixion himself seemed startled by the action, but his attention was immediately drawn to her palm. Why wasn't there a scar? The girl slit her palm and let out 300 gene of blood. The man thought she was crazy, but then she summoned the king. Hidden beneath a veil of jet black hair, Ceres was stunned. The king looked just like her. She had assumed it was the king's soul. Unexpectedly, it was just a remnant, and the king had been waiting for his final anointing. The unfortunate child filled him with both fear and anticipation. The king must know the answer. "Do you know what I'm looking for? What does the final anointing mean?" But the answer plunged him into despair, because he was the last head of the Haruga family, meaning that neither he nor Ricardo had any children. So, to maintain the lineage, he would be forever trapped in this endless cycle. Why? Why me? He just wanted to know the reason for this fate. This feeling of being neither dead nor alive. He truly didn't want to endure it any longer. The king seemed to see the first head of the Haruga family. If it were before, seeing his enemy's descendant in such despair might have brought him joy. But after countless years, he had changed, and the empire's king wasn't as the records described, with 14 generations, because he was the first and also the last. The reason for his death was the betrayal of the four great families. They not only killed him, but also shattered him into 99 pieces. He struggled in agony, breathed his last, and became the only remaining divinity in this world. To break free from the shackles of fate, the four sacred artifacts must be found. He could make the impossible possible. Ceres was utterly bewildered. Today was supposed to be his succession celebration. Amidst everyone's anticipation, he donned the 300 billion credit ceremonial robe for the first time. Yet, he encountered his brother, whom he'd rather avoid, earnestly intending to be his dance partner. But he didn't want to, nor did he need to. "Are you trying to disgrace the family? Do you know how I feel facing you? If you consider me your brother, please don't treat me like this." Ceres didn't understand why he cared. However, he did have a suggestion. "Since you care so much about the family's reputation, then just follow my lead." But it was clear his brother was quite unwilling. "So stop with the pretense. I've never had any expectations of you anyway." Within a magnificent ballroom, Ceres made his dazzling entrance. No one mocked him for appearing alone. On the contrary, the other two families offered their congratulations. But the late arrival of the Parvusnan heir was met with disapproval. He immediately took Ceres' hand with a possessive air. Ceres drained his glass, wanting it all to be over quickly. The specially made goblet signified his official takeover of Anoidin. Unexpectedly, after just 2 drinks, his vision blurred. He then remembered that his tolerance for alcohol was a thing of his past life. But looking at the goblet in his hand, it seemed no different from an ordinary one. It was merely a vessel used when offering wine to the king. Yet, it was treated as a sacred relic. How laughable. Wait, offer the wine to the king. The book stated that the finest wine would be poured into the Holy Grail and offered to the king. Recalling his first time entering the Four Seasons forest, the inscription on the stone tablet read, "Those who enter the king's sanctuary, prove yourselves chosen." He suddenly understood something. He inquired about Ixion's whereabouts throughout the hallway. However, he went the wrong way and encountered the Parvusnan heir. "But I'm sorry, I'm not here for you." This statement angered the heir, who grabbed his hand. "Then who are you looking for? Belgert? Ixion?" His eyes were filled with possessiveness. He stood on tiptoe. "Do you think I'm beautiful? Don't you? Do you think a few sweet words can win me over? Can they hide your filthy heart? You just want to trick me into bed to become a tool for bearing children. Ignoring the man's excuses, he turned and walked away with a flourish. After searching high and low, he finally found the person he was looking for. With a bright smile, he called out, Ixion. He wanted to go to the Four Seasons forest. Immediately, Ixion saw that familiar arrogance from their first meeting and couldn't help but smirk. All right, I'm willing to accompany you anytime. He hadn't expected Ceres to suddenly approach. She took his hand, intending to teleport them both. The rich, heady scent of roses was intoxicating. She couldn't get enough of it, swallowing repeatedly. He desperately wanted to hold her close, to steal her breath away, and then to completely possess her. Lost in these turbulent thoughts, they arrived at their destination. Hearing Ceres offer Wang Jing a drink, Ixion thought it was endearing. But he hadn't expected this kind of endearing, and this outcome wasn't what Ceres had intended. 3,000 years had passed since the king's death, yet he was the one left to bear the punishment. He felt a surge of resentment, but could only express his refusal by throwing his glass to the ground. He couldn't understand why it had to be him. The girl stood before the mirror. Without hesitation, she stepped through, only to accidentally stumble into a man's bedroom. Tornet ups, a bewildered face. What are you doing here? Ceres was instantly mortified, her face burning as she turned to flee. Wait, the man grabbed her, refusing to let her go. What are you doing suddenly appearing in my room? Don't tell me you used a mirror. Ever since he'd seen the king's phantom that day, he'd been furious. He wouldn't even let the newly arrived, sycophantic, two-faced girl near him. Until Ixion arrived, he returned to his usual politeness, a stark contrast to his behavior the previous night. It made Ixion feel a little uneasy. After all, they had collaborated numerous times, met on countless occasions. This sudden formality felt strange, and he had so many questions. What are you really trying to do? What are you looking for in the Four Seasons forest? Seeing the other man's reluctance to speak, he pressed further. That thing imbued with the king's divinity. Will you go looking for it? Of course not. Ceres' reply was swift and decisive. He would never do something so childish. Yet, in the blink of an eye, he contradicted himself, rushing to the king's temple, a place perpetually shrouded in otherworldly energy. Although the king's description had been vague, if one imagined divinity as something tangible, like the unique abilities of the four great families, then it wasn't difficult to connect it to this place, especially this room 72. He could sense powerful energy fluctuations emanating from within. Just as he was about to enter, Ixion teleported in. Didn't you say you wouldn't look for it? Caught red-handed. He didn't panic in the slightest. As long as he didn't admit it, what could anyone do? But when Ixion, analyzing the divine energy, asked if he wanted to go inside, he was speechless. He couldn't leave, and he couldn't go in. But even if they entered together, wherever the door led, he would deny everything to the very end. It was truly infuriating. Well, this bedroom is quite luxurious. The paintings on the wall are rather appealing. But why is there such a large bed? And it's covered in rose petals. How romantic. Standing back to back, the awkwardness was palpable. Thankfully, they quickly noticed something amiss. It was this covered object. He ripped it open. It was a mirror. Don't touch it, Bakshin had just said, but Ceres reached out and touched it anyway. After all, experience is the only source of truth. Are you always this bold? Aren't you afraid? He was bombarded with questions. Memories of his past life surfaced. That man was perhaps his weakness, his fear. But for him now, it all meant nothing. He reached out and touched the mirror again. Ignoring the warnings behind him, he stepped through the mirror first. Bakshin, having no other choice, followed closely behind. They had stumbled into another family's treasure vault, but danger arrived in less than 3 seconds. Having heard a strange noise, 2 patrolling guards opened the door to investigate, but found no one there. At that moment, the two were squeezed together, hiding in a wardrobe. If one of the guards hadn't been so lazy, they might have been discovered. Once things quieted down outside, the pair emerged from the treasure room and wandered around the castle. Finally, they found something useful, a book depicting the scene of the king's death. The 4 great families had divided his heart. Ceres reached out to touch it, but was stopped. Bakshin told him not to be so reckless. But this is my business, Ceres retorted with a mind-your-own-business air. Have you forgotten? We're partners now. Bakshin was firm. Either they did it together, or he would stop Ceres completely. And how do you plan to stop me? Ceres reached out to him, their fingers interlacing. The vow they made with their powers not long ago was still fresh in his mind. He was convinced Bakshin was just talking. But Bakshin remained steadfast. Ceres gave up arguing. But you'll regret this. Releasing their hands, they both touched the painting. The moment their fingers made contact with the heart, the entire painting shattered, shards of glass scattering across the floor. As the painting vanished, a shimmering, golden-red gem appeared. As Bakshin reached to pick it up, the gem pulsed with golden light. An image suddenly flashed in his mind. A girl with dark, pinkish hair, her face obscured. Ceres experienced no such vision. A commotion erupted upstairs. They had been discovered. Bakshin quickly grabbed Ceres and teleported them home. But the image lingered, unsettling him. He wanted to see it again. Although no vision appeared this time, a sense of dread washed over him. Without a word of goodbye, Bakshin vanished. It was the first time Ceres had seen him like this. What was that image? Curiosity flickered within him, but he pushed it aside. He only wanted to find divinity and then die. The next day, he returned to the mirror. According to his research, it was a portal capable of taking anyone anywhere they desired, but hadn't specified someone else's bedroom. A knock came at the door. One of Ixion's subordinates had something to report. He caught a strong scent of roses. Sniffing with his enhanced sense of smell, he realized it was coming from his leader's room. The scent of the Anoidan air was present in Ixion's quarters. He was told not to enter. So that's how it is, he thought. The young lady devours 300 pounds of stones every day. Her father remained unsatisfied. He cut her skin open, forcefully stuffing the stones inside. Be good, it'll be over soon, he said. Ceres had endured this agonizing pain for 4 lifetimes. It wasn't until his 5th life that Ixion rescued him from that dark, cramped room. He would never forget that moment. His wretched father flew into a rage, trying to stop them. He even called in a group of thugs, but they were all knocked down with a single kick. If Ricardo hadn't shown up just then, his father's head would probably have rolled. He cowered in Ixion's arms, terrified. And this stranger, this Ixion, had faced down his older brother and that manipulative woman for him. Just when he thought he was about to be punished too, Ixion said, "It's all right. You're safe." The man's gentleness allowed him to feel warmth for the first time. It was also on this day that he left Anoidan for the first time. When he woke up again, the bed was surrounded by concerned faces. They constantly showered him with care and warmth through their actions. He almost felt like everything before had been a dream. But he didn't understand. Why would such a good man save him? Why be so kind to him? Their only connection was a single encounter in childhood. Did Ixion want to use him too? But even if that were true, so what? At least here, he could live like a human being. He remembered having nightmares when he first arrived, scratching his arms and staining the sheets with blood. It was Ixion who appeared and pulled him back to reality. He apologized to Ixion. Why? Why are you apologizing? You did nothing wrong. Ixion understood his suffering. But it hurts so much. Yes, Ixion replied. Being hurt does indeed cause pain. This seemingly cold man constantly offered him warmth, but he kept resisting. After all, if he allowed himself to depend on someone again, only to be betrayed, he was sure he would completely shatter. So he resolved never to open his heart to anyone again. Yet, only a few days later, he cried like a child, because Violetta had come to see him. He was blind now, but his thoughts were consumed by Ceres. He remembered their encounter a year ago. Ceres' desperate plea for help when his father went berserk. But he hadn't understood what it meant at the time. Perhaps plagued by guilt, he begged Ixion to go and rescue Ceres. All consequences would be borne by Carisha. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Violetta sobbed. I shouldn't have waited so long to save you. Ceres' eyes welled up. Someone had lost their sight trying to save him and was now apologizing. Compared to his own cruel father, this act of kindness left him weeping uncontrollably. Had he been so foolish to allow his family to treat him that way? This was the first time he had confided in anyone. He didn't know that Violetta's guilt held a deeper meaning. In his vulnerability and sorrow, stirred a protective instinct in Ixion. His mission had only been to rescue Ceres and leave him in Carisha's care, but the thought of Violetta's inability to protect himself made him reluctant to let go. Watching the usually anxious boy, sleeping so peacefully now, he seemed like the sea after a storm, glassy and shimmering, beautiful and captivating. It made Ixion even more reluctant to leave him. But as he looked up, another image of the boy suddenly flashed through his mind. Just like now, in his 8th life, Ixion remembered everything. The boy raised his hand and ripped the roof off the 1,000-square-foot house. His father thought he'd gone mad, but the boy wanted his life. Countless vines lashed out, and a sharp pain shot through his father's abdomen. He was utterly terrified. He quickly knelt, a pathetic figure convinced that his actions weren't severe enough to warrant his daughter attempting patricide. "I'm your father, Ceres." With every word, the hatred in Ceres's heart intensified. "It's understandable that you don't understand, father, but I'm going to make you experience the pain I've endured in this life." Ceres raised her hand again. In the blink of an eye, her father's hair turned white. He became a frail, elderly man, his prized spring power completely gone. But it wasn't over. Ricardo wouldn't escape either. Hearing her father's bewildered questions, Ceres felt a surge of bitter amusement. She had deliberately provoked her brother, giving her father and him ample time to plot against her. That way, when that person appeared, when all these rats were nestled together, she could exterminate them all at once. But now, she no longer wanted to formally strip them of their family name as head of the house. "I want you both gone. Immediately. Now, get out." Only when they were gone could she find a moment's peace. The reason for her frenzy started with that mirror. She had stumbled into Ixion's room. What she thought would be an embarrassing encounter unexpectedly revealed that the Beljet family possessed something similar to the mirror. It was a golden spear, the Beljet family heirloom. Until yesterday, the spear hadn't shown any unusual activity. Then, suddenly, there's a surge of energy. The moment she touched it, it shattered with a sharp crack. The fragments coalesced into gold, the stone identical to the one from the painting. A flash of golden light, raven black hair, a stoic face. Who was this woman? She held the golden spear, standing over an unmoving king. Though heartbroken, she plunged the spear into the king. Horrified by the bloody scene, Ceres dropped the stone. Was this what Ixion had seen? Before she could process it, fear washed over her again. Ixion picked up the stone. This time, he remembered everything he had forgotten and the person he had been searching for. Don't remember," Ceres pleaded, terrified. But it was too late. He fled back to his home. Ceres didn't know what Ixion had remembered, but it was undoubtedly connected to her. She couldn't understand. This hadn't happened in previous lifetimes. Why was this one different? Her fear escalated. Was it because of the influence of the 7th life? She couldn't figure it out, but even if Ixion remembered, it didn't matter. She planned to end this life prematurely. Suddenly, the stone in the drawer spoke. "Eat me, hurry and eat me." So that was it. The king had told her to seek divinity. If this gem was the king's millennium sigh, wouldn't eating it grant her that power? As if discovering a new continent, she picked up the stone. Opening her mouth wide, she swallowed it, hoping to gain the lost power. But before she could, her father caused another problem. He'd walked right into the line of fire. That's how it all began. Thorns filled the room, bathed in moonlight. Ceres closed her eyes, savoring the last breaths of freedom. "Ceres? You're here." Hearing Ixion's concerned voice, she was filled with regret. Regret for walking alongside this man once more. She remembered her 7th life, ending it with Ixion by her side. Perhaps that was the reason for the change, despite her claims of indifference. But the memories of his past life infuriated and humiliated the man. He couldn't bear the thought of anyone understanding his pain and hatred. He was in agony. Should he just end it all now? She treated him like trash. Yet he treasured her. "Use me," he thought, "until I'm worthless. Then discard me. It won't be too late." Ceres was defeated by this person. He had considered ending it all with suicide. But what if this man remembered everything again in the next life? What then? So he couldn't do it. But this man was truly a nuisance. Not only had he moved into his home, but he was also constantly underfoot. It completely ruined his appetite. Axios had said he was willing to do anything for him, and Ceres only needed him for the 4 seasons forest. So, don't appear before me unless necessary. In other words, just be a quiet, ornamental plant. Such insulting words were too much even for the maids to bear. They expected Beljet's leader to be angry. So, Axius asked, arms crossed, head tilted. Will you water me on time then? Take care of me? Since you've taken on a plant, you should be responsible for it, right? Those words sent Ceres storming off. The maids were terrified. He, however, was indifferent, shrugging. It seems I need to consider how to be a good plant. Axius's presence prevented Ceres from acting rashly. He waited until the dead of night to slip through the mirror and investigate the divinity matter alone. What is this bare landscape? He was stunned. Axius was even more embarrassed. This isn't really appropriate, is it, in the middle of the night? Is it that mirror again? He asked, pulling out a gem. He assumed the mirror's teleportation and the gem were connected. But Ceres knew better. It wasn't the gem. The mirror's instructions stated it would transport the king to any place he desired or needed to be. So, in truth, deep down, he wanted to come here, wanted to have this man. The realization terrified him. Shadowy hands seemed to bind him. Be selfish. Make what you desire your own. Go. Only you are worthy in this world. The voice echoed in his ears. He told himself repeatedly, no, I don't want to possess him. But he could lie to himself, not to the world. He struggled internally. Axius thought he was crying. After all, the girl in his memories had always been crying. As for why, he still couldn't recall. Only that promise remained. I am willing to clear all obstacles for you. The missing pieces of his memory were a headache. Ceres looked at him. If he used the mirror alone, the same situation would surely repeat itself. He reached out, wanted to take this man somewhere. They passed through the mirror once more. The place was pitch black. Not only was the stench nauseating, but there was also a thick, metallic scent of blood. A clang echoed through the darkness. Cages filled with monstrous creatures of Carisha blood lined the space. Their gaping maws were horrifying. Who are you? How did you? The brown-haired man didn't finish his sentence. Ceres silenced him with a single, fatal blow, facing Axius's bewilderment. He said calmly, since we've been discovered, there's only one thing to do. The intense smell of blood sent the caged monsters into a frenzy. They seemed to be saying, give him to us. Give him to us. He granted their wish. Extending a vine, he flung the brown-haired man into the cage. Seeing Axion's stunned expression, Ceres innocently pointed at the monster, indicating she had merely lent a helping hand. She had assumed Axion would find her brutal. Leave this kind of thing to me from now on, she said. After all, your traces linger longer than mine. It's pointless if even this doesn't scare them off. She was exasperated. Suddenly, she sensed a surge of otherworldly energy. This energy seemed to be heading somewhere. She gave chase, afraid it would escape. Wait, Ceres! Axion grabbed her and pulled her away. Someone was coming. To win the girl's heart, he attacked his father, who was also his older brother. Looking down with the air of a victor, he grabbed his elderly father, no, his elderly brother, by the hair. Choose, die by my hand or hand over the leadership. What drove Chris mad was hearing that Ceres had not only driven away her family, but also turned Enoidan into ruins. Although it was laughable, he refused to be left behind. Having obtained the coveted position of head of the family, he immediately sought out Ceres. He offered it to her as a courtship gift in the name of the head of the Palvanon family. Ceres was speechless, but as long as they were one of the 4 family heads, she wouldn't refuse. She usually traveled to the 4 Seasons forest with Axion. However, something unexpected happened last night. Hiding in a corner, they overheard a familiar voice. Someone from the Kalisha family had taken in the exiled father and son. Ceres sensed the energy fluctuation. Perhaps they were carrying something. She wanted to follow, but it wasn't the right time. Axion's face was covered by Ceres. He didn't know who the two were, but he smelled a familiar scent. Emerging from the secret room, it coincided with Ceres wanting to investigate the matter alone. He temporarily returned to Beljerk. In the mysterious basement, a familiar aroma, a familiar scent. Judging by Ceres's reaction earlier, one of them must be Ricardo. But who was the other person? While in the villa to the Enoidan father and son, these questions reeked of conspiracy. He initially suspected the Emery family was behind it all, but according to his subordinate's investigation, the Emerys had nothing to do with the monsters. And that painting from before? It turned out the head of the Emery family had stolen it from the royal sanctuary, simply to add to his collection. He never would have guessed the real mastermind was his free-spirited mother. She had an unusual relationship with Terzo. For the sake of their grand scheme, they decided to bring Enoidan into the fold. Although there were risks, wouldn't it be interesting? So, when Ricardo was rejected by Ceres, filled with hatred, he felt that shining position should have belonged to him. He couldn't stand it, but he was powerless. Then, Terzo extended an olive branch. Now, they had taken him and his father in. He felt gratitude, even though he was being used. And even with his father gravely ill, he still longed for his adopted sister. He believed that as long as his family was together, things couldn't get any worse. I'm speechless, the narrator thought, but he also had many questions, like why Terzo had taken him in, and why that place they were forbidden from approaching always emitted such a foul odor. But Chris dared not ask. He had a feeling that if he did, things wouldn't end well. The girl smiled and extended her hand. Chris, like a dog spotting a coveted treat, scurried forward, convinced he'd captured her heart. It was the first time he, as head of the Palvanon family, had been led by the hand into the Four Seasons forest. He'd planned to seize the moment, unleash his masculine charm, and sweep her off her feet with sweet nothings. But she abruptly yanked her hand away. The girl vanished into the mist, leaving him utterly bewildered. Who am I? Where am I? He thought, disoriented. Purple-tinged black fog swirled around him. He spun in circles, unable to find a path. Meanwhile, Ceres was in the Spring Branch family's archive, having already perused hundreds of books. He recalled a faint light that had persisted in the mist, seemingly guiding him here. Could it be another gem? He wondered. But this time, things were different. The archive was filled with an intricate network of bell-like devices. He'd never seen anything like them, yet he instinctively knew how to use them. He reached out and touched one. All the bells began to shake wildly, emitting a cacophony of ringing. With a resounding boom, the entire room was bathed in golden light. But nothing else happened. He checked his watch. Dusk was approaching. He remembered Axios's invitation to dinner that morning. He kept telling himself to focus on his mission, but as time slipped away, he lost all interest in reading. He slammed the book shut, and without a backward glance, left the archive, reappearing in the mist. Chris had meant to ask Ceres where he'd been, but he was completely ignored, infuriated, yet unable to do anything about it. He trailed after him, chattering nervously. He feigned anxiety about being in the forest for the first time, then questioned whether Ceres even knew the way. He was utterly exasperating. Yet, Ceres' sharp glare sent an unexpected thrill through him. Led out of the Four Seasons forest, Chris shamelessly persisted in his fawning. But Ceres simply stated, "Same time tomorrow," and vanished before his eyes, giving him no chance to protest. Never having been treated this way before, it only fueled his determination. He was eager to see how long she could resist his charms, unaware that Axios had already beaten him to the punch. Not only was Axios staying at Ceres' house, but he also carried the scent of Ceres' signature rose-orange perfume. Even Ceres' mother couldn't help but blush. Are they really in love? She wondered. Axios assumed the elders had said something, but it was the strong scent of rose-orange that had given him away. Watching his mother gush over Ceres, eager to meet her future daughter-in-law, Axios felt a strange, instinctive resistance. Are you afraid I'll eat him? Ceres teased. Anyone who harms Ceres will answer to me, and that includes you, Axios stated firmly. His mother couldn't help but marvel at her son's intensity. Axios had sought her out today because of the scent he'd detected in the mysterious basement, the scent of his mother's custom-made tobacco. Using the pretense of waiting for his father, he'd come to his mother's room, where he sensed the presence of magic. The source of that magic was an ordinary-looking golden key. His unease intensified. As he reached for the key, a familiar voice spoke. His mother leaned against the doorway. "So, you're interested in this sort of thing?" she asked, having just dreamt of her daughter for the first time. Axios' father was nearly frightened to death. In the dream, his daughter kept calling out for him. "This is the fourth life I've lived through," Ceres thought, a chill settling over her. He thought his daughter was mad, but in a blink, she was clutching another handful of blood. "I'm so scared." The childish face was filled with the stillness of death. Her father couldn't understand why. He watched his daughter, trapped within a crimson jewel, screaming for mercy. Each scene was so vivid, so real, it felt like she had truly lived it. Dream or reality? He was no longer certain. That's why, after strangling his daughter with his own hands, he recoiled in terror, his face contorted with horror. He stared at his trembling hands, refusing to believe, unable to accept, that he could commit such a heinous act. Ceres had opera back home. Unlike usual, this time, someone was eagerly awaiting her return. "Welcome back." She immediately sensed something was amiss. It was the golden key in Axion's pocket. "Yes," Axion readily admitted. "I received this when I went out today." remembering her mother's request to investigate the key's origins. She decided to keep it for now. I'm not planning on handing it over just yet. I hope you understand. Ceres was puzzled. If he had found it himself, why was he asking for her permission? Because what's mine is yours, so I will definitely give it to you. Despite Axion's casual demeanor, Ceres knew, both from this life and past ones, that he always kept his word. He had specifically hurried back for dinner. Axion seemed pleased. I don't know what you're talking about, Ceres retorted, her usual defensiveness rising. She was always so contrary. Even the voice within her own head couldn't stand it. You clearly care. You clearly want to be kinder to him. Yet she feigned indifference. It would be so much easier to simply admit her feelings, no matter how well she masked it. Axion saw through her lies. Don't worry about our morning arrangement. Let's go to the dining hall together. A faint blush colored Ceres' cheeks, but her goal remained unchanged. If the door to death appeared, she would open it without hesitation. Even though Axion's gentleness had sparked a flicker of desire to live, uncovering the truth about the divinity was still her priority. Returning to the royal sanctuary, she found a device similar to the one she'd seen in the Four Seasons forest. Could there be a hidden space here too? She reached out and touched it. A chime rang out, accompanied by a flash of golden light. Transported to another space, she initially thought she was still in the royal sanctuary. Then someone called out, "Lady Ceres." It was the heads of the branch families. They flocked to her like children finding their mother. Enoidan has been reduced to ruins. We were so worried. As the head of the first branch family of Enoidan, Norton thought, I shouldn't let my anxiety show so plainly. Realizing his lapse in composure, he quickly apologized and bowed in respect. A chorus of "Hail, Spring King," echoed around her. In the past, the deference of her vassals had felt overwhelming. But now, she was accustomed to it, feeling no trace of awkwardness. Even accepting gifts from those who had betrayed her didn't surprise her. Addressing the head of Montana, she deliberately brought up the recent monster attack in Aimliff, praising Cordia's bravery. She wanted to gauge his reaction. The result was disappointing. She loathed the four great families, yet she pretended to offer reconciliation. If only he had been more forthright, she wouldn't hold him in such low regard. Suddenly, a wave of energy rippled through the air. Chris and Axion were fighting. She rushed towards Axion, fearing for him, but he pushed her away. Are you trying to tempt me? He asked. No, Ceres tried to deceive herself. But while she had been speaking with the branch families, she had sensed the powerful surge of magic. The moment she realized it was Axion, she had used her vanishing technique. Ceres arrived immediately at Axion's location, only to find the two men fighting. Chris, upon seeing her, couldn't contain his joy and, like a 3-year-old, began to complain. Apparently, Ceres and Chris had planned to meet in the Four Seasons forest today. Still smarting from the previous humiliation, Chris had deliberately arrived 2 hours late, hoping to see Ceres fretting. Instead, he was stood up, his face darkening with anger. He swore to himself that he would make Ceres pay for this. But the person he was waiting for didn't show up. Axion did. He even ignored Chris, just like Ceres had. This irritated him immensely. Using a greeting as a pretext, he deliberately bragged about his supposed date with Ceres today. Looking at the large iron gates of the Four Seasons forest, Axion realized that Chris had become the head of the Palvanon family. He wasn't about to offer congratulations, especially after hearing Chris boast about holding hands with Ceres, all while wearing that infuriatingly smug expression. His mind went blank. He couldn't understand. He had made that vow and was willing to be used at any time. Why would Ceres still choose Chris? Jealousy overwhelmed reason. Dark power gathered in his palm. If he just got rid of this guy, he would be Ceres' only choice. The instant he raised his hand, the surroundings shattered. Chris thought he'd gone mad. No, imperfectly sana. Otherwise, how could you still be standing here in one piece, talking to me? Just as he was about to unleash his killing blow, Ceres appeared, seeing her standing between them. His jealousy surged. He turned to teleport away. To his surprise, Ceres took his hand and left with him. But weren't you going to see Palvanon? What does it matter if I came here? Do you want me to go back to someone else? You know what my answer is. Remembering Chris's words, Axion felt uneasy as Ceres continued to hold his hand. Because in his memories of his fifth life, when Ceres was at Beljerk Manor, the look in that man's eyes, even a fool could understand what kind of feelings those were. Ceres was speechless at his jealousy. In her heart, only this man mattered most. Why couldn't he understand? Calling him a fool, She reached out and, unable to help herself, took the initiative for once. She felt like she was going crazy, but Axion couldn't pretend to be indifferent. After all, he had waited for this day for far too long. Leaning down, this time he took the lead, feeling the gentleness of her hands and the warmth of her lips. Ceres could no longer lie to herself. Before, she had always been afraid to look Axion in the eye, fearing that one glance would reveal her carefully hidden feelings. Yet, she yearned to be near him, to always be by his side. Now, she could finally face her own heart. "If only I could die like this," she murmured, teasing him, yet wanting to disappear irresponsibly. He caught her hand. "Don't do that. Don't run away. I won't let you go. So just give up." Ceres was utterly defeated. Gently, she embraced his neck, kissing his hair. Memory, intertwined with desire, pulled her back to her previous life. It was after she had been rescued and brought back to Beljerk Manor. A maid had wheeled her out to the courtyard for some fresh air. There, she saw Violetta and Axion. Seeing them laughing together, she felt a pang of sadness. Although he stayed inside all day, he had heard that the two were childhood sweethearts, and neither had ever interacted with anyone else of the opposite sex. Watching the bouquet in Axion's arms, he thought they were truly a perfect match, using the intense sunlight as an excuse. He had his attendant wheel him away. Unexpectedly, a voice called out. Axion had actually chased after him, bouquet still in hand. He had assumed he would be scolded for wandering off, stammering and stuttering for a long while, without managing to utter a single word. Unexpectedly, the man smiled gently and offered him the flowers. So they weren't for Violetta. He felt a secret surge of relief. But then, a troubling thought arose. Could Violetta have asked Axion to give them to him? Regardless, he was grateful for their care. The attendant immediately recognized the flowers as calendulas. Their meaning, happiness is sure to come. He murmured the words repeatedly, staring at the flowers in his hands, a rare smile gracing his face. He asked Axion to convey his thanks to Violetta. "But these flowers, I prepared them for you. I was worried you might be bored." Flustered, he didn't know what to say. "But if you like them, that's good." Suddenly, realization dawned, and he lowered his head, blushing furiously. He had to pretend he didn't know. Only now, he couldn't pretend any longer. This handsome man before him was the only choice he wanted. Meanwhile, Violetta was already fuming. She had explicitly warned Axion not to get entangled with the Spring Branch head. Yet she received a message from him. "Ceres and I are together. Don't contact me unless it's important." What was with that haughty tone? Although she hadn't heeded his warning, she couldn't bring herself to blame Axion. After all, she was equally drawn to him. She didn't understand why she felt this way. She hadn't even been able to greet Ceres at his succession celebration, because she had been following Teltso. She had seen him enter the Montana estate with her own eyes. As a branch family of the Kalisha, it was normal for them to interact. But sneaking over in the dead of night? That was strange. Teltso always wanted to be her first choice, eager to marry her, just as the elders wished. But she knew very well that what Teltso truly desired was the Kalisha family. She racked her brain, but couldn't figure out his specific scheme. Thankfully, Ceres had arrived. After visiting the ailing head of the Kalisha family, he was being led by the butler to meet Violetta and Mag. Unexpectedly, Teltso appeared, offering to keep him company during the presumably boring wait. Ceres didn't sense any divinity from Teltso, yet he could feel a faint divinity emanating from somewhere within the estate. Certain that the house held something he sought, he accepted Teltso's invitation. But after a few sips of tea, he heard Teltso mention Violetta and her sister from their childhood. Apparently, the three of them had been close. Then, unexpectedly, the sister had run away to avoid an arranged marriage and given birth to Mag. Violetta would do anything for Mag, wouldn't she? Teltso put on a mournful facade. Ceres found it laughable to think he was actually having tea with such a two-faced man. Looking at Teltso's seemingly kind smile, he knew he could kill him with a flick of his wrist. But there was no need. In his 7th life, he had done many things to change his fate, but some things simply couldn't be altered. Little Mag still died at the age of 16. His daughter pulled her scumbag father off his pedestal, then gave Shiega a good beating, and finally kicked them both out of the house. After all, useless trash was an eyesore. Having clearly understood the new Jiao's stance, Teltso, who moments before had been insistent on having tea, suddenly lost all desire to continue the charade. He offered a few cursory pleasantries and hastily departed the greenhouse. Ceres' words, "I drove them all away," echoed in his mind. His original plan, banking on the complete despair of the father and son, shattered. He rushed to the small villa, seeking news of the former Inoue Injaju-esque condition. He found Ricardo in a state of distress. His father's condition was worsening. Not only was he perpetually asleep, but he had also begun muttering deliriously to himself. Ricardo was deeply worried, yet unsure what to do. To his surprise, Teltso offered a knowing smile. "Excellent. It seems the medicine is working quite well." The already bewildered Ricardo was now utterly dumbfounded. Unsure if he'd misheard, he was shocked when Teltso confessed outright, revealing his meeting with Ceres earlier that day. "He's truly abandoned you all. I thought you might be of some use, but seems I overestimated you." Teltso addressed the distraught Ricardo. "Where is Miss Gabrielle?" Ricardo instinctively replied, "She's gone out." Then, a flicker of doubt. "Isn't Gabrielle out?" He'd personally escorted his sister out both yesterday and the day before, yet hadn't seen her return. Realization dawned. He seized Teltso by the collar. "You bastard! What have you done?" His vision blurred, his strength drained away. He stumbled and collapsed unconscious. The irony was palpable, indifferent to his own sister, yet so fiercely protective of someone unrelated. Even Teltso, a scoundrel in his own right, couldn't comprehend such behavior. His fiancée had abandoned him, run away, and borne a child with another man. Yet he still found the child endearing. So adorable, in fact, that he couldn't resist reaching out to touch her, only to have his hand swatted away by Violetta, who clutched the child protectively. That wary look, as if he were some kind of Godzilla. He was taken aback. Though Violetta claimed she feared he'd mess up the child's hair, he knew the truth. He would never truly be a part of Violetta's life. But if he just planned a little faster, this ending would arrive sooner, wouldn't it? Wait, that wasn't right. Why this ending? He dismissed the thought, attributing it to exhaustion. Meanwhile, within Belger Castle, Nixon received a peculiar gift. A monster, its body covered in festering sores, yet faintly exuding divine power. Even more remarkable, it was the same species as the one at the Emery estate. Nixon immediately channeled his divine power, confining the monstrous creature elsewhere. His subordinates showered him with praise. Several of us couldn't even budge it. The chief is truly amazing. Their flattery, however, couldn't change the fact that the courtyard was now a disaster. The world is so vast, why drop a monster in the courtyard? This fellow, Stedman, scratched his head sheepishly. He'd intended to teleport it to an empty field, but his powers hadn't fully recovered, and his aim was off. He hadn't thought it would be a problem. He was taken aback by Nixon's sudden anger, the reason for which initially escaped him. However, being quick-witted, he swiftly proposed renovating the courtyard, replacing the barren grass with a vibrant flower garden, more befitting his future wife's elegance. "Oh, excellent idea." Nixon clapped him on the shoulder. "This arduous and glorious task is yours. If the results are unsatisfactory, be prepared for the consequences." He turned and left, giving Stedman no chance to refuse. Their shared romantic gesture had, as usual, become his burden alone. She yearned to possess him completely, yet feared confronting her true feelings. The voices in her head clamored, "Go, go completely." Having him, Ceres sighed in relief and down a shot of pure gold, erguitu. With a whoosh, she appeared in Axian's bedroom. Axian was instantly dumbfounded. "What's the matter? Why are you here so late?" he asked, one hand resting on the sofa. She stepped closer, reaching out to caress the earring he wore. The voices in her head finally quieted. Axian couldn't understand her cryptic words, but the faint smell of alcohol and the slight flush on her cheeks told him everything. His erratic girl was drunk again. He kissed her slender fingers. "Since you can't sleep, come here." Catching him off guard, she pulled him into an embrace. Two adults squeezed onto a small sofa, the air thick with the sweet and sour scent of love. This went on for the rest of the night. Held tightly in her arms, he felt both thrilled and overwhelmed. He wanted to push her away, but he was afraid of hurting her. He hadn't realized that Ceres was also awake. "I wanted to hold you like this for a long time," she whispered, her eyes filled with a deep sadness. Axion was taken aback. "Is there anything else you want to do?" he asked. "Anything at all. Just tell me." Without a word, she flipped over, pinning him beneath her. "Shh, don't talk," she murmured, placing a soft kiss on his ear. He thought it would end there, but then she kissed his firm chest. Axian's body jolted as if electrified. He couldn't bear to imagine what would happen if she continued. He grabbed her hand. "We have to stop," he urged. But Ceres' next words not only made him blush crimson, but also left him speechless. "When you did this before," she confessed, "it made me so happy. I'm just trying to recreate it. Are you angry? Or does it make you uncomfortable?" He wanted to say no, that he wasn't angry, but he didn't want to continue tonight. "Really? But you were angry with me before." He was completely bewildered. He couldn't remember ever being angry with her, especially not with his beloved. It wasn't until Ceres mentioned their sixth life that he realized he'd lost his mind back then. He immediately began apologizing profusely. When they first met in their sixth life, he had coldly called her a fool, saying her control over her powers was worse than a child's. He had even told her to get lost and stop being an eyesore. Hearing how much he had hurt her, how she had cried for so long, his mind spun. He frantically apologized, begging for her to hit him, to scold him, anything until she felt better. Then, Ceres suddenly leaned in close, telling him not to move. He braced himself, but her punishment was so sweet, it was almost unbearable. It was a shame about the feather pillow, though. He barely made it to dawn. Just as he expected, the sober Ceres was both angry and embarrassed. Without a word, she got up to leave. It seemed she hadn't forgotten what Axian had said. Axian told her to drink less, worried she'd get drunk and seek out someone else. This nearly made her explode with anger. "Don't worry," she retorted. "When I'm drunk, the only person I want to find is you, Axian." Axian slit his palm, letting 300 gene of blood flow. He spoke to the air, asking questions. His rival thought he was crazy. But then he summoned the king. Ever since the king's last appearance, Axian had wanted to return to the Four Seasons forest. He needed to know what the king had said to Ceres. But Ceres seemed reluctant to go back to the Four Seasons forest with him. After much deliberation, he concluded that Chris was the only suitable choice. So he sought him out. Well, are you here to apologize?" A man of few words and brutal action, he lashed out with a swift strike. The blow caught Chris completely off guard. He had been channeling his powers, battling his subordinates. But, worried, Chris ran towards him. "What a fool," he thought, yelling for Chris to stay back as he swatted him away with a single palm strike. But the momentary distraction proved costly. A black hand shot out, too fast to react. In an instant, his throat was constricted, his feet leaving the ground. With a whooshing sound, they arrived outside the gates of the Four Seasons forest. The gates hummed and buzzed. He was thrown roughly to the ground. As his senses returned, he realized where he was, the Four Seasons forest. Fury choked him. How dare he treat me like this? Axian stood before the stone monument, indifferent to his rage. After the celebratory feast, he and Ceres had returned here once more. He had even collected Ceres' blood in the sacred chalice. But the chalice had inexplicably fallen. Perhaps the king's remnant's appearance had been a mere fluke. Perhaps it had vanished or fallen dormant. But his gut told him the entity could still hear him. So he spoke to the air. "I have a question for you. I hope you'll answer me." Chris could no longer contain himself. This utterly unhinged man had somehow won Ceres over. When Ceres' throat had been seized just moments ago, he had caught a whiff of an intoxicating rose scent. Even more infuriating, the same fragrance clung to Axian. Anyone with a lick of sense knew what had transpired. Jealousy surged through him. He roared Axian's name, and with a furious gesture, Belgert unleashed a barrage of ice shards, a clear message of lethal intent. But Axian merely raised a hand, a casual flick of the wrist, and the ice shards disintegrated before they could reach him. "I find you rather unpleasant as well," Axian said, his hand still raised. Two opposing forces of power exploded between them. Before Chris could react, Axian had teleported behind him, seizing his rival's arm. He grabbed Chris's head and slammed it against the stone monument with a sickening thud. Blood splattered onto the monument, and a golden light emanated from the stone. The king's remnant had reappeared. Having lived for so long, it mused, its voice laced with amusement. "This is the first time I've witnessed such a display of petty jealousy. And between two men, no less. Descendant of Belgert, are you intending to offer me the descendant of Parvanon as a sacrifice?" The king's remnant propped its chin on its hand, its gaze cold. Axian didn't deny it. "Do you truly intend to offer Parvanon as a sacrifice?" The king had appeared. He finally knew the truth. He hadn't heard the entire conversation between Ceres and the king last time. Where do my memories originate? And what is Ceres' wish? Axion desperately craved the truth, but he wasn't prepared for the gut-wrenching revelation. Ceres wished for eternal rest, for his soul to be forever silenced. He yearned for true death, because from the past to the present, he had been murdered 6 times and had attempted suicide once, yet he couldn't truly die. This was his eternal prison. The king scoffed at Axion's foolishness. Violetta had glimpsed the truth. She had warned him, but he had ignored her, even if he refused to believe it. This was the inevitable outcome. Why? Axion stumbled, nearly losing his balance. Every word about Ceres struck him like a tidal wave, crashing against his mind. Fragments of memory resurfaced, sharp and agonizing. Ceres begged him to end her life. He was unwilling, unable. But I'm tired. I want to give up on everything. Thank you for always being willing to help me. But next time, don't. A hollow smile stretched across Ceres' face. Axion clutched his head. The ache in his chest was a physical thing, choking off his words. She must have been in so much pain. These memories, shards of a shattered timeline, should have remained buried forever. But when Ceres ended her life, a sliver of her soul lingered. And he had sworn an oath. He would do anything for Ceres. But this promise would force him to deliver the woman he loved to true death. The thought hadn't even fully formed when the king's remnant delivered another devastating blow. Between true death and him, Ceres would choose the former, and he would remain trapped in this time forever. An unknown amount of time passed before Chris, the unconscious pawn, finally stirred. The air, thick and oppressive, held him immobile. A sense of wrongness prickled his skin, followed by the chanted word sacrifice echoing through his mind. They were going to use him as a sacrifice. Damn them. He gritted his teeth, roaring, "Let me go." With a surge of adrenaline, he ripped through his restraints. A sickening, tearing sound followed. He turned to see Axion frozen in place. A 2-meter gash ripped across his chest. Blood dripped steadily down Axion's arm. Chris stared, dumbfounded, his first instinct to panic. "Are you all right?" Then, remembering his own injuries, he huffed. "Serves you right for just standing there." Silence hung heavy in the air. He felt a flicker of unease. He babbled on, justifying his actions, deflecting blame. Axion, as always, remained impassive. He ordered Chris to follow. "Who are you to order me around?" But when Axion actually started to walk away, panic flared. He watched the bloody footprints marking Axion's path. He wanted to tell Axion to stop the bleeding, but the other man remained unresponsive. Then, impossibly, the footprints vanished. He had no choice but to follow. They emerged from the Four Seasons forest. His subordinate, little Cutie, immediately rushed to his side. "Don't worry, I'm fine." Watching Axion leave, his mind seemingly elsewhere, he called out to his subordinate, "Raymer, has anyone said anything about Axion losing his mind?" The first time he met Violetta, he called her disgusting. Yet, instead of being offended, Violetta reacted with an almost gleeful excitement, as if she had discovered a hidden treasure. It turned out that after sobering up and leaving Belgert's mansion, Ceres had gone to the pastry shop, intending to buy some treats for Mag. But the memory of the previous night still stung. Regret was a useless emotion now. What happened next was even more baffling. Axion's mother walked in. Despite it being their first meeting, she addressed Ceres by name, recommending the mint candies. Ceres simply turned to the shopkeeper and ordered one of everything to be delivered to Caricia. Only then did she address Jenin Belgert. "Do as you please." She didn't even bother with the title. Yet, Jenin remained affable. To Ceres' surprise, Jenin even offered her a cookie. Ceres gave her a cold look, perhaps to avoid further interaction. She chose a mint candy. The two formidable women walked down the street together. Passers-by couldn't help but feel a shiver of apprehension. Jenin remarked that Ceres was special, so special that she was different from everyone else in Enoidan. No wonder Axion was so smitten. The words left Ceres speechless. She had once envied this woman. He longed to live as freely as Jenin. But now his thoughts had changed. The conversation abruptly shifted to mint candies. "This flavor is truly disgusting," he remarked, the candy in his hand dissolving into a shower of roses. The atmosphere between the two was bizarre. Even Axion's lackeys found it unbearable. Shitman hadn't wanted to spoil the mood, but he was genuinely afraid of being reprimanded. "Former leader, please stay away from the Chuanji family," he pleaded. The former leader, Han, simply scoffed. He rambled on about how much Jenin had changed, while black energy coalesced in his palm. If Axion hadn't given him specific instructions, he would have attacked right then and there. Jinan offered a helpless smile. After bidding his soon-to-be daughter-in-law farewell, he vanished on the spot. Ceres instantly felt the air grow lighter. As for why she loathed Jinan so much, it all went back to when Mag was imprisoned. As a subordinate of the Karikia family in Montana, the head of the family, Bora, had always resented the four great families. He yearned to supplant them, but lacked the power. After all, they didn't possess the bloodline of otherkin. So he set his sights on young Mag. Using Mag's blood and tears, he conducted relentless experiments for 4 years. Not only did the sacred blood transfusion fail, but he also created a horde of worthless monsters. And the one who supported these wicked deeds was Jinan Beljurt, simply because Bora had promised to show him something interesting, the complete overthrow of this world. Unfortunately, not only did he not witness this, but he was also constantly monitored by men sent by his own son. So, he orchestrated the child's escape. After infuriating Bora, he departed without a care. He hadn't expected to run into his stalker right after leaving the king's temple. Axion wasn't sure what he was up to. At the end of the road, I hope not to meet you, Jinan advised before disappearing, leaving behind the lingering scent of roses amidst the black energy. Ceres didn't need an explanation to understand what had happened. Driven by curiosity, she couldn't resist meeting her future daughter-in-law. But his strange expression, his words, "I knew I'd seen you before." Ceres couldn't shake it off after returning home. This was clearly their first meeting in this lifetime. Could it be related to Axion regaining his memories? Lost in thought, she heard a commotion outside. It seemed Axion had returned. She rose to greet him, but then she heard shouts urging someone to find a doctor and stop the bleeding. Her gaze was cold, devoid of emotion. Reaching the top of the stairs, she saw Axion, and the 2-meter-long wound, still gushing blood. Fury ignited within her. Who did this to you? For the first time, her beloved felt anger. He was both heartbroken and confused. This 2-meter gash, compared to Ceres' painful past, it was nothing. Remembering the king's remnant's words, that Ceres yearned for true death, he felt a suffocating grief. He reached out, pulling his beloved into a tight embrace. He desperately wanted to confirm the truth of those words, but he was afraid to ask, because Ceres wouldn't deny it. He could only plead, begging her to give up on death, begging her not to abandon him. But it was too selfish. He swallowed the words back down. Sensing his distress, Ceres understood without him having to speak. Perhaps she, too, had fantasized about what Shed Man had suggested, marrying this man, moving into the Beljurt mansion. But if the chance for death, the only chance, presented itself, she would seize it without hesitation, leaving Axion with nothing but pain. So, she decided not to be greedy. Gently pushing him away, she said, "Let's end it here." "No, I don't want this." Axion held her close again, his embrace unyielding. He absolutely would not let go. Even if the ending Ceres' desire came to pass, he would remain by her side. He would not release her, not even in death. This was the only future he could accept, the two of them entangled until the very end. Despite their intertwined struggle, Ceres never revealed who had wounded Axion. But judging by the wound, he had a pretty good idea. Such a wound could only be inflicted by an ability user. It had to be either Jinan Beljurt or Chris. But Jinan had no reason to harm her own son. That left only Chris. To be injured by such a weakling, coupled with Axion's reaction, he must have heard something from the king's remnant. That must have been how he was caught off guard and injured. Axion's words about never letting go left him restless and unable to sleep. Suddenly, a whooshing sound, a wisp of black energy, seeped in from under the door. He hesitated at the door for a long moment, but finally opened it. Axion stood there, looking utterly forlorn. He was suddenly gripped by fear, the fear that Ceres would vanish. He had come to make sure she was still there, to feel the warmth of her cheek. It was such a relief. She was still here. Seeing the Sheen-ting, heartache, distress in her expression, he wasn't exactly happy, but he found it endearing. It was a look she reserved only for him. The mirror in the room could transport someone to any place they desired. Yet, Ceres always appeared before him unexpectedly, a sign that their hearts yearned for the same thing. If it all ended now, they would both surely feel regret. "So, stay with me," he pleaded. "Whatever you want to do, let's do it together. Until we're sick of each other, tired of each other. Perhaps then, when we part, the pain will be less." Ceres thought this man was incredibly audacious, always whispering such sweet nothings. What was worse, even as her heart ached, she found herself reaching out, drawn to him. And then she kissed him. After lifetimes of suppressed emotion, she finally, bravely, reached out. It wasn't until the following afternoon that Ceres slowly opened her eyes. Seeing that handsome face, this time she didn't try to escape. Instead, she worried about his wound. After last night's activities, it must be hurting. But why did he look even more handsome than before? Confusion clouded her features. Thinking back on her own crying and carrying on last night, she was speechless with embarrassment. She must look awful. She buried her face in the pillow. Was I too much? Is that why you don't want to look at me? Axian's words reached her. He didn't offer much explanation, only telling her to remember to be a little more moderate in the future. His entire body ached, but then he heard her whisper, "No." Axian's eyes were fixed on her. He honestly wasn't sure he could control himself. And with that, he kissed her deeply again, the air filled with sweetness. He also wanted to do some things he'd been wanting to do for a long time. She had expected something extravagant, but it turned out he wanted to brush her hair. He brushed it until it was silky smooth, then held her close from behind. He wanted to hold her like this forever. Their tender moment was short-lived. A knock echoed from the door. A maid had arrived with Ceres's favorite cake. At the words favorite cake, Axian's ears perked up. He quickly told Ceres to invite the maid in. Looking at the dark, almost black cake, he felt a pang of regret. If he had known this was her favorite, he would have bought her every kind of sweet imaginable. But it wasn't too late. He scooped up a piece of cake and offered it to her. Ceres was clearly still a little uncomfortable. Seeing his insistence, she closed her eyes and opened her mouth. It was a new experience, and she was a little clumsy at first. Ceres had gotten frosting on her cheek. Axian had never seen her look so adorable. After wiping it away for her, he couldn't contain himself and burst out laughing. His laughter made her lose all interest in the cake. Then, he said something that made her blush even more. Lilith froze, her face burning crimson. A dark aura enveloped the rose, and the two spent another passionate night together. Axian finally stirred, gently caressing his beloved's face. Only after hearing the door, close did Lilith dare to open her eyes. She got out of bed. It was time to settle the score. After 2 days and nights of bliss with Lilith, Axian finally turned his attention back to business. He'd barely stepped inside when he was met with a soul-searching question from a subordinate who had tried to contact him 999 times. "Where have you been these past 2 days?" The subordinate looked utterly dejected. Suddenly, a captivating scent of roses wafted through the air. "Oh my God," Shedman thought, instantly understanding. When the leader moves to Enoyadin, he absolutely has to take me with him. He quickly reported on the former leader, Hans, meeting with his future wife, Ceres. It seemed she wasn't very fond of him. Shedman wore a foolish grin, enjoying the drama. Oh dear, what's the leader going to do? Seeing Axian's patience wearing thin, he finally presented a few ruby shards. These are the cause of the animal mutations. They also cut off the monster's breathing. Ever since they found that monster, Axian had tasked Shedman with conducting experiments. But whether it was with abilities or ordinary weapons, it was incredibly difficult to kill the monsters. The ruby inside their bodies had to be completely shattered. Looking at the fragments in his hand, Axian realized the gravity of the situation. He immediately went to Caricia to find Violetta. But the first thing she asked about was Ceres. Even little Mag came running, drawn by the scent, only to find it was Axian radiating the aroma of roses. Disappointed, Mag left with a pout, prompting Violetta to scold Axian for his shamelessness in carrying another woman's scent around. Seeing Axian's unrepentant attitude, she could only sigh in exasperation. She finally allowed Axian to see the Caricia family head, to whom he presented the ruby shards. The head, with his discerning eye, declared it was 80% certain it was Caricia blood. To be sure, he wanted to capture another monster for confirmation. But since Belgerd had purged the empire of monsters, capturing a live one was now incredibly difficult. Suddenly, Axian thought of a place. The basement he and Ceres had visited through the mirror. He might be able to catch one there. But until he had concrete evidence, he didn't plan to tell the Caricia head. But the head already seemed to have a premonition. An unsettling wind was about to blow through Caricia. His words hinted at his cousin. Terzo. It was unclear whether this was the unfounded worry of a dying man or a true premonition. Seeing his own health decline day by day, he entrusted his daughter, Violetta, and grandson, Mag, to Axion, hoping he would keep them safe from harm. Seeing Axion readily agree, he felt both grateful and relieved. But he had one more request. He produced a glowing box. The moment he opened it, Axion's heart skipped a beat. According to the family, it was an ancestral heirloom of Ceres's, left with the Caricia family. Because of a dream he had last night, he felt it was time to return it to its rightful owner. His beloved was injured, and he stormed into the perpetrator's home, destroying their family heirloom with a single blow. He then tried to force open their treasure vault. Unfortunately, it was protected by a powerful barrier. But with a little more effort, Ceres was confident she could break it. He was suddenly grabbed by Chris, that naive fool, who seemed more worried about him getting hurt. This, however, sparked an idea. Wasn't the shortcut to opening the barrier right in front of him? He flung Chris's hand away, coldly demanding he open it. He expected refusal. Surprisingly, Chris obliged, opening it for his perusal. He saw Ceres raise her hand again. You wouldn't dare destroy these treasures, would you? He mocked, feigning confidence. His bravado vanished in an instant. A crash echoed as Ceres shattered the display case. The ruby, which had resembled a magic mirror, transformed into a shard of the gods. What was this thing? Chris, obviously out of the loop, had no idea. Why should I answer you? Ceres' eyes flashed with a cold light. Axion's injuries. They're because of you, aren't they? Chris's silence was taken as confirmation. In a flash, countless thorns erupted from the ground, lashing across Chris's body. Nourished by his blood, the thorns bloomed with dazzling flowers. If you ever touch him again, you're dead. With her warning delivered, Ceres vanished. Chris collapsed, bewildered. He was the one who'd been attacked, yet somehow, Axion always seemed to be the one who suffered. Ever since witnessing Axion's frantic behavior, he'd been puzzled. And even stranger, Caricia's lost heir had been found. He'd even made a serious proposition, offering Caricia's tears exclusively to Parthenon in exchange for an alliance in some grand scheme. He'd assumed it was Caricia's idea, but Terzo gave a knowing smile. This is a proposal from myself and the Elder Council, though it will soon become Caricia's. Clearly, there was internal conflict within Caricia. Before Chris's bewildered mind could process this, Ceres arrived, ready to tear the place apart. Meanwhile, back in Caricia, Axion emerged, holding a box. He stared at the pocket watch-like object within, his face etched with unconcealed sorrow. This thing, it might actually make Ceres disappear forever. The cruel irony was that he had to deliver it to her himself. Dejected, he returned home, placing a gentle kiss on his wife's cheek. They embraced with a sweetness that suggested the world might end the next moment. When he produced the box, Ceres was surprised, but seeing Axion's grief, she bowed her head silently. He murmured, "I miss you so much. Kiss me again," as if to reassure her. The second hand ticked. His mind drifted back to the Four Seasons forest. She was the king's most beloved, but carrying another's child. She was willing to forsake immortality and the power to command all things just so the king would allow her child to live. But the time of their original covenant was fast approaching. The king understood her yearning for motherhood, but the appointed time could not be postponed. He promised her, however, that when she and her child reached the end of their lives, they would experience no pain. This was the memory fragment Ceres witnessed. The look of astonishment on Anoiadin's ancestor's face suggested he'd guessed the truth. He stood motionless, his body icy cold even when Axion embraced him. Meanwhile, Jia Paoluo, who had vanished for what felt like an eternity, finally reappeared. His hands and feet were bound, and he huddled in a corner like a beggar, tears and snot streaming down his face like a mask. It turned out that when his father and brother were driven away, he had fled with them. The strange thing was from that moment until he was locked up here, he had no memory of what happened. No one had come to this place. Yet, every day, like clockwork, half a loaf of bread and a bowl of water appeared. This terrifying dark cell reminded him of someone else who had been locked away. That girl, monstrous in appearance, always crying out his name, begging for help. Would he become like that too? The more he thought about it, the more terrified he became. After an unknown amount of time, the door to his prison finally opened. He thought it was Ricardo. His eyes lit up with hopeful anticipation, but it was Axion. He shrieked as if he'd seen a ghost, scrambling back as the man approached. The closer Axion came, the more frantically he retreated. Axion simply asked if he knew the whereabouts of his father and brother. He promptly fainted, his nerves frayed beyond their limit. Through the haze of unconsciousness, he heard them talking about taking him away. No, absolutely not. The Axion in his memory was a man who had squeezed his throat, spitting out threats. If he lied, if Axion was the one who killed Mag, then his lies would become his last words, and he would die in the most agonizing way imaginable. The murderous look in Axion's eyes, he would never forget it. In the blink of an eye, only 2 days remained until the hunting festival. News of Chris and Jia Palyuo's broken engagement had already spread. Would he be searching for a new fiancée at the festival? The gossiping young ladies speculated amongst themselves. But even more intriguing were the two over there. The festival hadn't even begun, and Ceres and Axion had already arrived. Their affectionate display made the young ladies blush, yet they couldn't look away. Unexpectedly, Axion became angry the next moment. Ceres had mentioned wanting to find a beautiful ocean because Mag wanted to see one. Although these words had been spoken by Mag in a past life, Ceres wanted to fulfill his wish in this one. In truth, Axion wasn't angry about that. He was upset that Ceres hadn't included him. "Then let's go together," he said. Hearing this, he relaxed and couldn't resist kissing Ceres again. The onlookers were speechless. "Oh my God," someone whispered. "Is this something we're allowed to see for free?" The girl cut her palm and let the blood flow. The 300-pound king appeared. This time, Ceres didn't react with the same excitement as before. Instead, she coldly raised her hand. With a whoosh, she unleashed a barrage of thorny vines. But they didn't even scratch the king. Seeing the king's unimpressed expression, she said, "Sorry, I just wanted to verify if you truly possess the king's aura. Are you taking your frustration with Belgerd out on me?" The king's words may have struck a chord with Ceres, but not entirely. She hadn't liked the king from the start. Unfortunately, the king wasn't a tangible being. If she wanted the king's remnants to disappear, she would have to continue collecting the scattered divinity. And when that day comes, the king said, "Your wish will become my wish." With the chime of bells, Ceres teleported from the Four Seasons forest to a small grove of trees. Based on her recent investigations, the divine essence was scattered across 19 different locations. Following the faint scent of divine aura, she found another gem in the grove. She was absorbing more and more divinity. Now she could easily enter and exit the Four Seasons forest on her own. Searching for the divine essence was exhausting, but as long as it meant she could finally disappear, she was willing to work herself to death. Looking at the picturesque landscape before her, she wished Axion could see it too. However, Axion was a little busy at the moment. Despite bringing Jia Palyuo back, he hadn't gotten any useful information. Fortunately, he had also captured one of Jia Palyuo's lackeys. Unexpectedly, the lackey was full of lies. He claimed he only wanted to take care of the young lady, and that he only tied her up because she was acting foolish. He feigned complete ignorance about the Anoidan family. Axion, however, had anticipated this. The more the lackey lied, the more reassured he felt. This only confirmed the man's desperation to live, and that gave Axion leverage. Using his ability, he seized control of the lackey's arm. He would pull out the man's fingers one by one until he got some answers. A chilling aura emanated from Axion, transforming him into a menacing specter. After confirming Terzo's involvement from the lackey's forced confession, Axion arrived at the hunting grounds the next day. He preferred to keep Lilith in the dark about his investigation into the whereabouts of the Anoidan father and son for now. Rather than interrogating a shameless person like Terzo, he decided to gather more evidence. He was about to head back when Violetta called out to him. Seeing her urgency, he assumed it was something important. It turned out she simply wanted him to escort her back to Caricia. It wasn't a pressing matter, and he wasn't the leader of Caricia. Axion refused without hesitation. Even if she was annoyed, he couldn't help it. He was a taken man, after all. He considered finding someone else to accompany Violetta, but that wouldn't be possible until nightfall, which would be too late. Violetta's expression was grave. It concerned the tears of Caricia. Seeing her tense demeanor, Axion asked, "Is this about Terzo?" Before Violetta could answer, a familiar, cloying scent of roses wafted through the air, accompanied by the same telltale shimmer. Ceres had arrived. With each step closer to death, she grew stronger. She could even sense, from miles away, the presence of her beloved. To confirm her suspicions, Ceres teleported to the source of the dark energy. Seeing the two of them together, a pang of jealousy shot through her, though her expression remained cold and impassive. Her powerful aura, now laced with an even more intense rose scent, made it clear she had recently consumed a gem of condensed divinity. She had merely been drawn by curiosity, never expecting to find them together. "Do you have something to do?" Violetta asked, puzzled. "Yes, but it's already taken care of," Ceres replied, her usual coldness tinged with an unusual edge. Even Violetta noticed the difference. Axion and Violetta exchanged glances, then hastily explained what they had been discussing. Upon hearing that Violetta wanted Axion to use his ability to send her home, Ceres extended her hand. "Allow me," she said, glancing at Axion's fidgeting hands. "You can follow along, or wait here if you prefer." As soon as the words left her lips, she vanished with Violetta. Honestly, Axion sighed, exasperated, but he followed after them. The scene shifted. Inside Caricia, Terzo and Jia Paluo crossed paths. After exchanging cursory greetings, they brushed past each other. "I advise you to tread carefully," Jia Paluo warned, unable to contain himself, recalling the events at the hunting grounds, where Terzo, along with a group of insignificant nobles, had openly provoked Violetta. Jia Paluo found the blatant hostility both shocking and unexpected. He had assumed Terzo, in his pursuit of power, would align himself with influential nobles, not a band of lowlifes. And for him to reveal his true colors so quickly, what was his purpose? What scheme was he brewing? These questions plagued Jia Paluo. He hadn't given it much thought until Chris's appearance, which sent a chill down his spine. Chris had grown stronger, and the source of that power was all too familiar. It was the tears of Caricia. While the four great families possessed abilities, aside from the Anoiodin, whose power increased through multiple blossomings, the strength of the other families typically remained constant. Seeing Chris and Terzo side by side, a sense of foreboding washed over him. With the important event fast approaching, Burla truly didn't want any slip-ups. But Terzo didn't take him seriously at all. After all, he was merely a Caricia affiliate. He had no right to order his superior around. Despite this, Terzo, irritated, returned to his study to pour himself a drink. But before he could even take a sip, Violetta stormed in, demanding answers about the treasure and berating him shamelessly. She told him he had no right, knowing full well the pain behind Mag's tears, to give it away for others to see. He smiled, offering no reply. Violetta, unable to contain her fury, raised her hand to slap him, but he caught her wrist. "Why so angry?" Terzo asked, feigning confusion. "Isn't it normal for a scoundrel to do scoundrel-like things? Besides, we've both despised each other for so long. I simply decided to let go first." Violetta fumed, but she couldn't do anything about him. "But if you dare lay a finger on Mag," she seethed, "I will stake everything, and I will make you die in the most horrific way imaginable." The cloying scent of roses that clung to him lingered in the study long after he left. Such a potent aura. Terzo sensed danger. Ceres and Axion, just what kind of variables will they introduce? I'll need to reassess. The first time the girl took the boy out, they were intercepted by her past life's former lover. Apparently, on the day he stormed into Parthenon, Chris had seen a phantom of her past life. The love and hate intertwined between him and the girl. If it was an illusion, why did it feel so real? As if it had truly happened. His gut told him Ceres must know something. The moment he saw his target, he wanted to get some answers. He immediately approached her, wanting a private conversation. Rejected, he impulsively tried to grab her, but a small hand swatted him away. Little Mag, barely a meter tall, stood protectively in front of Ceres. "Didn't I say we have nothing to say?" No one is allowed to bully her. Referring to Ceres as her guard, she spoke with even greater conviction. "That's right, I will protect Ceres." Such spirit from someone so young. The onlookers murmured their approval, as expected of Caricia's heir, making Chris look like the villain. He He was so angry, sparks practically flew from his eyes. He wanted to lash out at Mag, but Ceres stepped in again to defend her. Remembering his deal with Terzo and Ceres' current standing, he forced a smile. After all, the hunt had just begun, meaning there would be plenty of opportunities later. Don't tell me you actually harbor such delusions. You're utterly foolish. Ceres didn't give him a chance to retort, sweeping away with Mag in tow. But no sooner had she dealt with one than another pair, an old man and a child, arrived. They declared their intention to present her with their most prized game, which unexpectedly drew someone else's ire. This old man, accompanied by his seemingly simple son, introduced themselves to Ceres and also offered their most prized game. Mag glared at them both, practically wishing they would vanish. Thankfully, Violetta appeared just in time, breaking the awkward tension. But before they could exchange more than a few words, Axion arrived. Ceres playfully scolded him for being late. He expertly pinched her cheek, but explained he needed to return home briefly. The sudden display of affection caught everyone off guard, especially little Mag, who looked as forlorn as a puppy. Meanwhile, in a basement somewhere, a pitiful creature wailed in its cage. Even Jinan couldn't bear to watch. Deej looked even worse than the monsters. Seeing someone approach, he barked and howled like a madman, tried to use his status to intimidate them. But the moment he heard about his son, his face went blank. Only now did he realize his precious son had also been kidnapped. His agitation mirrored the monster's own. Jinan stood in the shadows, speechless, so concerned for his son, yet so heartless towards his daughter. At the mere mention of his daughter, Jinan's expression shifted. The image of his daughter's tearful pleas for mercy caused him to tremble uncontrollably. But it was just a dream. He couldn't believe he was capable of such inhuman acts. As the woman walked further away, he desperately tried to bargain, to offer something, anything. But no one was willing to listen to him anymore, especially not the unhinged Jinan. Strange images flickered in and out of his mind. After seeing Deej, he was certain they weren't hallucinations. He just had to wait a little longer. Then he would understand what was happening. The girl had been wailing for 7 days and 7 nights. The man's mood darkened. He grabbed the girl's throat. "Do you want to die?" He had hoped to find some clues from the broken girl. But whether it was who imprisoned her or what happened during that time, she either couldn't remember or didn't know. She just kept wailing incessantly, crying for her father and brother. He held up a golden key. "Have you seen this?" She kept her head down, silent. But it was this useless demeanor that sparked fragmented memories in Axion's mind. Because Ceres was covered in blood, the manipulative younger sister had claimed Ceres was a murderer, saying she'd seen it with her own eyes. So that was it. Axion finally understood why he felt such animosity towards this face. She even used Ceres as a shield. If his subordinates hadn't stopped him, he would have strangled the manipulative girl right there. But even feeling the intense killing intent, even terrified out of her wits, Jia Paoluo still wanted to see her sister. She couldn't explain why, but she felt she owed Ceres an apology. Lost in thought, the man threw her roughly onto the bed and vanished. He arrived again at the villa where Ricardo had stayed. But the thick layer of dust on the table showed no sign of habitation. Ricardo was cautious. It also confirmed that this place held secrets. Looking at the stag's head symbol on the wall, he gathered dark energy in his palm. With a resounding boom, he shattered the wall with a single blow. As he used his power, Ceres felt it in the hunting grounds. Mag, curious, asked what was wrong. Before she could finish, they were interrupted. The man with the 2 tufts of hair on his head seemed to be from a prominent family. Ceres didn't recognize him, but she could tell he was foolish. Everyone knew that only Ceres remained of the Anoidan family. Yet this idiot brought up Deej and Ricardo, hoping to embarrass her publicly. Instead, he was the one humiliated. Under the immense pressure of Ceres' power, the man trembled, still stubbornly refusing to accept the Anoidan's current state. Ceres didn't bother explaining. She simply summoned rose thorns to entwine around his legs. Her decisions required neither understanding nor agreement. Her face remained impassive. She calmly advised him to understand his place before speaking to her again. After listening to the man's pleas for forgiveness, she sipped her tea elegantly, as if nothing had happened. Mag watched her with concern, then witnessed something astonishing. The girl exuded a captivating rose scent, a fragrance so potent it held the entire forest creatures in thrall. From the smallest butterflies flitting at her feet to the grandest elk and even hulking brown bears, all were drawn to her in an unprecedented display of awe. The scene sparked murmurs of astonishment from onlookers, and even her usually doting boyfriend stared in disbelief. The girl, serene amidst the throng of animals, was more than just captivating, Axion thought. Ceres couldn't resist, striding towards her. Though they'd been apart for less than 2 hours, it felt like autumns had passed. Before everyone, she gently caressed the girl's face. Judging by someone's intense reaction, it went without saying that a kiss followed. This infuriated Chris. Ceres hadn't even spared him a glance, yet she willingly allowed that boy to touch her. Back home, he raged, throwing and smashing things, convinced that something precious had been stolen from him. Just as he caught his breath, the alluring scent of roses filled the air. He looked up to find Ceres hovering above him, her gaze fixed on him. Her icy expression made him falter. He hadn't realized that his dealings with Terzo were no longer secret. Ceres wanted to know what promise he had made to obtain the tears of Corycia. Chris, sensing an opportunity for equal footing, suggested they question each other. When she refused, he, in turn, refused to answer. "Don't misunderstand," Ceres said, her high heels clicking against the desk as she towered over him, her face a mask of cold fury. "The only right I'm giving you is to answer. So I'll ask again. What did you trade for the tears? Did you use your ability? Did you make a vow?" Chris was taken aback by how much she knew. He was even more surprised that without him saying a word, she had deduced that Terzo had taken the former leader of Parthenon. He stammered that it was for his father's treatment, a lie no one would believe. His head was seized in a swift grip, and with a whoosh, they were above the lake. Predictably, Chris plunged into the water. Looking up at Ceres' cold stare, he hung his head, utterly miserable. "Don't you love only me?" he pleaded, bewildered. He couldn't understand why the girl who had once looked at him with such longing had suddenly changed. Resentment and rage flared within him, only to be met with the dismissive label of delusion. The lingering scent of roses in the air fueled his jealousy. The cold radiating from him froze the falling petals. Lying on the ice, his mind raced, but one thing was clear. He wanted Ceres. His obsession grew, spiraling into madness. Even if it meant killing Axion, he would have the woman he loved. Hoping to see his sister, he decided to follow his beloved. The moment she arrived, he appeared before her. He knew Axion would tell him anything he asked, but now that she was here, Ceres had to see for herself. She opened the dilapidated door. Long time no see. Her sister, seeing her savior, launched herself forward, clinging to Ceres' leg, tears streaming down her face as she recounted her recent ordeal. But Ceres coldly stepped back, asking if she had eaten anything strange. Strange? She hadn't, had she? While she was still confused, Ceres touched her chin, using her ability to perform a quick, full-body scan. Just as she suspected. "You have eaten something strange," she confirmed, turning to leave. "Wait, I want to apologize to you, sister." Ceres thought her sister had lost her mind. She hadn't expected her to have regained memories of her past life. "I was wrong. I shouldn't have said you hurt Corycia's child." He was stunned for 3 seconds. But after hearing Ja Paluo's apology, it seemed she hadn't remembered everything. Otherwise, even if she felt guilty, she would never have come to apologize to him again. Listening to her repeated calls of brother, he could no longer see her as his sister. He wanted her to disappear from his sight immediately. Seeing his sullen retreating figure, Axion thought back to what had happened that night. He had told Ceres about Ja Paluo's situation. Instead of gratitude, he'd received a warning, a threat of breaking up. But how could he love anyone other than Ceres? He immediately ordered a nearby subordinate to throw Ja Paluo out. Anywhere would do. Ja Paluo was now completely screwed, treated like trash wherever she went, discarded without a second thought. The next day, at the hunting competition, someone else was stirring up trouble. Ever since witnessing Ceres' captivating display of power, many nobles without abilities wanted their own. The most ridiculous thing was, those nobles had actually sought out Terzo. They all hoped he could grant them mysterious powers. Even he found it hilarious. Because while Corycia's tears could enhance the powers of the 4 great families, they were not only scarce, but also useless for ordinary people. Corycia's blood on the other hand, had the opposite effect, weakening the abilities of the four families. It could grant ordinary people immense power, but at a steep price. While he was pondering this, he ran into Violetta's best friend, Cordelia. Hearing she was going to the hunting grounds, he gallantly extended his hand. "If you don't mind, shall we go together?" He hadn't anticipated she was going with Violetta. His outstretched hand lingered awkwardly in the air. He dropped the pretense and stroked the girl's hair. While offering words of support for their friendship, he edged closer and closer. "Big sister is going to marry someone else." The 8-year-old boy cried out in distress. Clutching and re-clutching the dogtail flower in his hand, he quickly offered it to the girl. "Even if you like another man, it's okay if I'm second or third." But liking someone didn't necessarily mean marriage. Although others thought they were close to marrying, Ceres had never considered it. "That won't do." Shedman suddenly appeared overhead. He still wanted to move his residency to Enoyadin. How could he do that if she didn't marry his master? The little horse, who had just been happily wagging his tail, now burst into tears. The words, "Please marry me when you grow up," remained unspoken. A strange yet familiar dark aura suddenly arrived. It was the irritating Jenin. He wasn't angered by Shedman's taunts. He was there to see Ceres. Every time he appeared, he always greeted her with flattering compliments. "I suggest you get to the point," Ceres said impatiently. He presented her with a golden box, claiming it was a special gift, but then he pulled it back, testing the limits of her patience. Meanwhile, Axion was still searching for his mother. Not long ago, he had received shocking news. The perpetually dry Seneca had completely dried up overnight. Even the surrounding area had become barren. His mother, Jenin, had also taken something. He hadn't seen her for days. He had a bad feeling. He returned to the basement he had destroyed. Once filled with mutated magical beasts, it was now eerily clean. Suddenly, a small hole in the wall caught his attention. This round, square shape, it seemed to match the golden key. He held the key, ready to insert it, then paused, feeling foolish. A wicked smile played on the corners of Chua's lips. He had a simpler method. Raising a hand, he delivered a swift palm strike. The blow tore a gaping hole in the wall. Good heavens, even a Lanxiang excavator couldn't have done it better. Astonishingly, on the other side of the wall was a subterranean river. Meanwhile, outside the basement, Terzo and Chris had arrived. It turned out the price for Carikia's tears was using an ability to send Terzo here. Although Chris had refused the invitation to go inside together, the repeated visits to this same location had finally piqued his insatiable curiosity, and it was so close to the hunting grounds. What was that guy up to? He took a step inside, then another. Using his ability to illuminate the path ahead, he realized the place was larger than he'd imagined. He searched for traces of Terzo, but a sudden, unpleasant scent soured his mood. That dark, powdery smell, how could it be so familiar? It was Axion. "What are you doing here?" he demanded. "And what are you doing here?" The two glared at each other, mutual animosity crackling between them. But Axion quickly realized Chris wasn't alone. "Who else is with you?" When Chris stubbornly insisted he was just exploring, driven by curiosity, Axion let out a scornful laugh. "A couple of punches will loosen your tongue. Honestly, I don't want to waste my time, especially on a clueless fool like you." Chris's anger flared. It was bad enough that Axion was always causing him trouble, but the insults were too much. If it weren't for Axion, Ceres would surely see him as he fantasized, her eyes and heart focused solely on him. Yes, eliminate him, kill him, and Ceres would be his. Countless ice blades erupted from the ground. His power had indeed grown considerably, but Axion remained unimpressed. Gathering his energy, he thrust out a palm. The two forces collided in a blinding explosion. The ceiling groaned and cracked. Debris rained down. Chris roared, his attack barely launched, when Axion sensed a far more dangerous presence. He barely had time to react before two, then three ferocious monsters lunged at him, their bloody maws gaping toward his head. The man who had tormented his daughter, Ceres' father, was finally facing judgment. Ceres fought back the terror that threatened to consume her. Just get through this day, and everything would be all right. But before the judgment could begin, a wounded messenger arrived with grim news. Shedman had lost control and killed many people. Axion had no choice but to leave, assigning several attendants to protect Ceres. No one could have foreseen that this would be the beginning of another tragedy. Deej, who should have been awaiting trial in prison, suddenly stormed the royal sanctuary. His cries of his daughter's name echoing through the halls as he reached for her once more. Thorny vines erupted from his palms, snaking outwards, even as the attendants threw themselves in front of Ceres. The piercing thorns sliced across her throat. She stared at her father, his face a mask of madness. Her eyes, wide with fear and confusion, could express nothing but shock. Words failed her. A vine whipped towards her, knocking her and her wheelchair to the ground, then coiling around her, lifting her into the air. Her cries of pain were lost on her father, whose rage only intensified. He blamed her not only for ruining Anoya's ability, but also for destroying him and Ricardo. He was blind to her tears of agony. As he raised his hand to deliver the final blow, a wave of dark energy erupted. Ceres collapsed, limp and lifeless, too weak to see what had happened. She could only hear her father's curses, repeated over and over again. Such intense killing intent. So his father really had wanted to kill him. Grief and despair, perhaps even tears, welled up. He couldn't understand his father's motives. This was the memory of Ceres the Fifth, but this was now the eighth. He no longer feared anyone. Faced with Jenin's provocation, he immediately unleashed his power. With a shing, he severed a lock of Jenin's hair. It turned out that after he took the divine artifact from the Seine, the place had wept. Hearing this rumor, Jenin immediately went to confirm it. Seeing the empty box, he guessed what had happened. To confirm his suspicions, he brought this box from the temple, but he talked far too much. Ceres launched a second attack. The future mother-in-law and son-in-law fought fiercely. Jenin hadn't expected his future daughter-in-law to be so strong. Was it because of her blossoming powers, or because of Carikia's tears? Ceres, exasperated, quickly bound Jenin hand and foot, successfully snatching the box. But after getting the box, he realized not only could he not sense any power, but the contents were also fake. He quickly found a real artifact, however, the gold ring on Jenin's little finger. Infuriated, he was about to teach Jenin a lesson when he heard terrifying sounds approaching. At that moment, Axion was being ambushed by a group of monsters. The two barely had time to react. He had intended to take them alive, but now he had to use lethal force. Unexpectedly, the monsters didn't attack him, but instead rushed towards the exit. Fortunately, Chris temporarily held them off. Axion fended off the monsters while yelling at Chris to guard the exit, much to Chris's annoyance. Looking at the crack above him, Chris had an idea. Then, with a rumble, the opening was completely sealed with rubble. He turned and slipped away. What a sneaky move. Fortunately, Axion was strong enough to easily dispatch the remaining monsters. But looking at the lifeless bodies, he worried if any had escaped. After all, this place was very close to the hunting grounds. With a jolt, he realized Ceres is in danger. He pinned his future mother-in-law underfoot. Thorns sprouted from his back like wings. Jenin's calm facade cracked. "What are you doing?" With a sickening rip, his little finger was severed. Ceres swiftly snatched the ring, placing it in his palm. Absorbing the divinity within the ring, a miraculous scene unfolded. The monsters that had been rampant moments before now bowed at his feet. Earlier, while he was sparring with his future mother-in-law, the monsters he thought were dead had suddenly reappeared in droves. They charged forward frantically, worried for Mag's safety. Ceres quickly told Shedman to take him away. The monsters pursued them relentlessly. He unleashed his power to deal with them, but a wave of dark energy interfered. Jenin flashed the gold ring on his newly regenerated little finger. "Why the rush? We still need to discuss the treasure." A spark of anger ignited within Ceres. He smiled faintly, playing along with Jenin's game. He grabbed Jenin, and the two vanished. Meanwhile, in the basement, Chris was still searching for Terzo. He spotted a group of monsters gathered around a small hole. Driven by curiosity, he blasted them all away with his ability. While he was still lamenting his pristine, white, buckled shoes, a rustling sound came from the hole in the wall. It was Terzo, emerging covered in blood. He ceaselessly complained about Chris being too loud, which irritated Chris considerably. But Chris, focused on dealing with the escaped monsters, pushed down his mounting questions. He had a promise to keep, to get Terzo to safety. No, not really. That pig-headed fool still hadn't realized that this entire disaster was orchestrated by their supposed allies. Terzo meant that dealing with the escaped monsters wasn't necessary. After all, before they could hurt anyone, Ceres would surely take care of them. But they didn't need to leave now, because he still needed Chris for something. That sinister smile boded ill. Yet he was the one who had unleashed the monsters, turning the hunting grounds into a living hell. Even their supposed ally, Bra, was shocked. The original plan was to lure away everyone with abilities using the monsters on the day before the hunting competition ended. Then they would make their move against Viota and Mag. But now, everything was in chaos. His daughter was with Viota. He didn't care what happened to himself. He turned and ran to find his daughter. The monsters were still rampaging, biting at everything. The men who usually swaggered about, swords in hand, were now terrified, crying, and begging for their lives. With a thud, Jinan was slammed to the ground. The intoxicating scent of roses began to spread. The monsters instantly quieted, bowing their heads in submission to Ceres. The sight stunned everyone. The way she looked down at them so effortlessly, she was breathtaking. His wife's throat had been slit. The man completely lost his mind. For the first time, he lashed out, hitting someone indiscriminately. Everyone was terrified, but his mother beamed. When Ceres absorbed the divinity from the ring, a strange memory surfaced in her mind. The founding leaders of the 4 great families, on the day they were supposed to return the power, had instead cut out the king's heart. Their greedy expressions were chilling. The memory snapped back to the present. The rampaging monsters were filled with resentment. Kill them. Kill the humans who did this to us. Ceres heard it all clearly. She hadn't expected the divine aura emanating from her to make the monsters submit. When Axion arrived, he was stunned by the sight. The men present couldn't tear their eyes away. But as they watched, Ceres' powerful energy gave one of them, a green-haired monster, an opening. It quietly grabbed a nearby bow and arrow. Although Axion noticed and yelled a warning to Ceres, it was too late. Ceres was struck by the arrow. The monsters, who had been so docile just moments before, were driven into a frenzy by the scent of blood. Snarling, they surged forward. Axion shielded Ceres with his body. Everyone thought he was about to attack the monsters. No one expected the countless blades formed from his ability to slice the attacker in half. This sudden turn of events, the gears of time began to loosen. Jinan finally understood why the rampaging monsters felt so familiar. In her past life, she too, driven by the grief of her husband's death, had killed many mutated humans. Axion was also consumed by memories. Run or we'll be killed too. Listening to the panic cries, he was overcome with guilt. It was in his 5th life. Ceres was choking Viota, such an important memory, and he had forgotten it for so long. Meanwhile, elsewhere, perhaps due to his Colikian blood, Viota, along with his close friend, was trapped high in a tree, surrounded by a horde of monsters. The monsters, their gaping maws filled with snarling teeth, began to climb. He knocked an arrow. Though he managed to hit a few, the damage was insignificant. He'd only succeeded in enraging them. One of the creatures slammed against the tree, and Viota watched in horror as his friend began to fall. He managed to grab his friend's hand, but his slender frame couldn't bear the weight. His friend begged him to let go, to save himself. He obeyed, but instead of climbing to safety, he chose to fall with his friend. Just as they were about to plunge into the waiting jaws of the monsters below, a thunderous boom echoed through the air. The monsters were blasted away. What kind of stage play are you putting on? Viota looked towards the source of the commotion. It was Chris. But why would Chris save them? Viota's face was etched with suspicion. What were these people really up to? His wife had nearly died at the hands of her own father, and now Axion was confronting his mother. He not only crushed her beloved pipe, but he also intended to strip her of all her power. In the memories of his 5th life, Ceres finally faced his father's judgment. He had expected to witness his father's crimes exposed, but instead his father escaped and nearly took his life. And the mastermind behind it all was Axion's mother. When he confronted her, Jinan blithely claimed it was a good outcome. At least the nobles weren't gossiping about Ceres anymore. Even Belgate was affected. That meant it would be easier for Axion to intervene in Ceres' affairs. But what he hadn't anticipated was that the old woman had intended to harm his own daughter. So, you're saying you were helping me? His mother simply smiled, offering no explanation. Axion understood. He snatched the pipe and reduced it to ashes. Mother, he said, the word heavy on his tongue. From now on, you had best watch even your breath. He stormed out, only to encounter Ceres in the hallway, trembling with fear. The mere sound of his name was enough to make Ceres flinch like a frightened rabbit. Axion's gaze softened with concern. He removed his black coat. "Can you stand?" he asked gently. "It's too cold here. Let me take you back to your room." Ceres, his emotions finally settling, found himself reliving the day's trauma in a nightmare. His father's terrifying face, illuminated by two glowing orbs, loomed over him, berating him for harming Inoya. He tried to flee, but countless black hands erupted from the ground, holding him fast. Terrified, he reached out, desperately trying to grasp a glimmer of light. But no matter how hard he strained, it remained just out of reach. "Someone, anyone, please help me," he pleaded. As his cries grew louder, the light grew stronger. And the source of that light was Axion. Their bond was forged in that moment, though neither would admit it. Several days had passed since the upheaval in the courtroom. He requested permission to leave once matters were settled, offering to compensate for any damages his father had caused. "Why do you want to leave so suddenly?" Axion asked, a question Ceres couldn't answer. He simply replied, "It's time to pick up the pieces." But before he left, he wanted to know what had transpired over the past 2 days. He thought he was prepared for the truth, but hearing it from Axion's lips still broke his heart. Despite being arrested on the spot, his father had faced no consequences for his actions. Even Ricardo and Gabriel were merely under house arrest. Why? He agonized over the past, day after day. The marks on Viota's neck remained starkly visible. He couldn't understand. Why hadn't those responsible received equal punishment? His stillness, his unwavering silence, frightened Axion. Several days passed like this. Today was Viota's birthday. Everyone knew Axion would be attending, yet he hadn't heard a word about it. If a servant hadn't let it slip, he would have remained completely oblivious. But now that he knew, he would, of course, offer his congratulations. Hadn't his mother bathed the city in blood, yet been declared innocent by the 4 great families? And now, she had nearly cost his sister-in-law her life. Axion had decided to seal his mother, Jenin's, powers. Yet, the elders vehemently opposed him. They claimed he had no proof and shouldn't shame his own mother. "But have you forgotten," he argued, "the rampaging zombies? They were merely victims, manipulated and used." The 4 families were still in council, debating how to resolve the situation. Yet Jenin, in that very moment, used her abilities to go to the square and unleash carnage. The horrific scene, it remains seared into my memory. If those with abilities cannot control themselves, how are they any different from the mutated? The elders desperately made excuses for Jenin, claiming she had acted out of grief for her deceased husband, pleading for understanding. It seems the 2 elders are getting on in years. Their hearing must be failing. His eyes, filled with icy resolve, threatened to dissolve the council entirely, silencing the 2 elders. And now, he was on his way to the Caligia family estate. Today was Viota's belated birthday celebration. At the birthday party, Viota, though blinded by the monster, greeted her guests with captivating grace. Little Marco presented a large gift. Touching the package, which felt like a wrapped mummy, he laughed. Before everyone, using the opportunity to thank his friend Axion, he introduced his rediscovered nephew. His smile was radiant. Ceres, hidden in the doorway, felt a pang of both envy and surprise. After all, in their few previous encounters, Viota had never worn such an expression. Suddenly, his gaze fell upon Marco. His normally calm face tightened, especially as he watched their shared laughter. Listening to the applause and joy emanating from within, he couldn't comprehend their happiness. Because of the Caligia family's blood, he had suffered so much, tormented for years, twisted into a monster. And so many innocent lives have been lost. How could they be so happy? Consumed by this injustice, his last shred of reason was devoured by his inner demons. When Viota, informed of his arrival, hurried to greet him, he, as if possessed, reached out and tightly gripped Viota's throat. His wide, unseeing eyes sent chills down everyone's spines. No matter what anyone said, he wouldn't release his grip. Only when he was forcefully shoved to the ground did he seem to fully regain his senses. Looking at his reddened hands, he couldn't even comprehend what he had done. Seeing Viota's pain, he couldn't believe he had harbored murderous intent, and towards his savior, no less. Chaos erupted. Axion, finally arriving via his abilities, saw his wife helplessly slumped on the floor, with so many people chattering around. His long legs carried him swiftly to Vyota's side, scooping her into his arms. They dared to gang up on his delicate, defenseless wife? When had the Kaligia family become so base? Someone tried to explain it was a misunderstanding. He wouldn't listen, but this woman just choked Vyota. Hearing those words, he finally noticed his equally distraught friend. His hands tightened around the throat of his savior, a horrifying act he couldn't comprehend. Those who witnessed it believed it was the onset of the mutation, demanding his confinement. Only Axion, defying the rising fear, shouldered the responsibility and forcibly escorted him away. The Kalikian elders were furious. They wanted to interrogate Ceres and reprimand Axion, but Vyota intervened. After all, Ceres had ample reason to hate the Kalikian family. Pitying his plight, Vyota decided to let the matter rest. He tuned out the elders' continued protests. Within Belgert Castle, a similar scene unfolded. Shortly after Ceres was brought back, Inoa Den sent a notice endorsing Ricardo's succession, citing Ceres' potential mutation. It was utter nonsense, yet the elders, hesitant to offend Ricardo, urged Axion to send Ceres back. But Axion knew that if he did, news of Ceres' demise would surely follow. Just leave, Axion growled, barely suppressing the urge to unleash his fury. He looked at Ceres, asleep and tear-stained. His heart ached with a mixture of tenderness and guilt. He turned and headed towards the Royal Temple prison. The prison held the victims of the Intelikia blood experiments, those warped and twisted by the mutation. Imprisoned alongside them were the architects of their suffering, Terzo and PRA. "This is my last visit," Axion declared. "Tell me how to cure the mutation." PRA remained stubbornly silent. Axion's patience snapped. He beckoned with a single finger. A subordinate brought forth a basket filled with vials of Kalikian blood, originally preserved for research into a cure. Its true purpose was far more sinister. Axion forced PRA's mouth open. He ordered his men to stuff the vials down PRA's throat. Rumors circulated that even the 4 great families were susceptible to the mutation. The subject of those rumors had supposedly consumed the blood for a year without effect. Axion, unwilling to wait, increased the dosage 5-fold, demanding PRA demonstrate the outcome. Terzo erupted in laughter, mocking Axion's naivete. "You seem to think your family is the only one untouched by this," he sneered. "Silence, or I'll kill you," Axion threatened. Terzo remained unfazed. PRA only wanted his daughter cared for. What did he have to lose? He revealed the truth. Axion's own mother, Jenin, had sought him out not long ago. Axion recoiled. "Why? Why would I hear your name from Terzo's lips?" Fear mingled with his rage. "Tell me it's not true," he pleaded, desperately clinging to the hope that it was all a lie. But his mother's face remained impassive. "Life was so dull," Jenin admitted. "I wanted some excitement." When PRA promised her a new world, she hadn't hesitated. She had even participated in the experiments. She spoke of the mutated victims with chilling detachment. Before Axion could fully process this revelation, Jenin dropped another bombshell. Of the 4 families with abilities, only Belgert remains. Even with the Kalikians inbreeding, their abilities have almost vanished. "Do you know why?" She produced a golden key. "Go," she said. "This is the truth I give you." His wife dead before his eyes. He had slaughtered everyone in his madness. The girl shunned by the world. He had taken into his home. But after the Kalikian banquet incident, Ceres had become withdrawn. Rather than face the harsh reality of waking, he preferred the solace of nightmares. Fragments of the past surfaced in his mind. Dream or reality, the lines blurred. Yet, he still yearned for Inoa Den, because then I could finally die. Axion's heart lurched at the words. He made the excuse that it was cold outside, that Ceres should stay a while longer. Looking at the sleeping figure in his arms, his face softened with tenderness. Recent events weighed heavily on him. He felt he owed Ceres an apology, but he knew that the moment he uttered those words, Ceres would forgive him, absorbing all the hurt and injustice. He couldn't bear to let that happen. Kissing the back of Ceres' hand, he murmured, "If you just give the word, I'll destroy everything that frightens you, everything that hurts you. So, can you give me a smile?" His face was etched with anguish. Feeling the warmth of Axion's hand, Ceres thought he was dreaming. After all, if this were real, they couldn't possibly be holding hands like this, listening to Axion's pleas. He forced a smile. "Thank you for coming to visit me in my dreams. Because of you, I'm not afraid to sleep anymore." But this peace didn't last. While Axion was away, the elders stormed into Ceres' room. Despite his pleas, they bound him and blindfolded him. The carriage lurched to a stop, and he was unceremoniously dumped onto the ground. The familiar, cloying scent of roses filled his nostrils. He knew he was at a Noah Den's castle. Someone dragged him roughly by the hair. It seemed this was where he would die. But instead of fear, he felt a strange sense of relief, even managing a small smile. The one he loved would never see him like this, broken and at his worst. He had barely been subjected to their cruelties when Axion arrived. Before the elders could speak, blood sprayed across the grass, staining it crimson. Watching the scattering figures, the carnage around him, Axion lost all reason. He wanted to destroy them all. Ceres called his name, his touch cool against Axion's burning skin. "It's all right, Axion. It's over. Calm down." Though his powers were waning, Axion seemed trapped in the grip of the past. Ceres triggered his teleportation, bringing them back to the familiar meadow. "Snap out of it." Axion's expression finally cleared. Feeling the solid reality of Ceres in his arms, he clung to him like a child. As Ceres spoke soothingly, guilt gnawed at him. How could he have forgotten those precious memories? The thought of being abandoned again, left alone in a world without Ceres, was unbearable. If what the king had foretold were to happen again, he wasn't sure he could survive it. All the monsters had bowed to him. He had almost lost control then, too. Looking into the eyes of the dead creatures, he heard the words "kill them" echoing in his mind. Ceres shuddered. If his beloved hadn't arrived, he might have truly slaughtered everyone. Even stranger, he wondered if the man who had aimed the arrow at him had been targeting the monster or him, a mutant reacting to his powers. Why had Jinan chosen that particular day to provoke him with a relic? And what of the suddenly dry Senna River? Even after 8 lifetimes, too many questions remained unanswered. What worried him even more, however, was Axion's sudden quietness. He had nearly lost control and killed someone yesterday. Yet today, he acted as if nothing had happened. He ordered his men to secretly transport the monster to Caligea and to ensure the secret of Calijon blood remained hidden. Ceres reached out, his worry evident. Should we go to Senna together? He suddenly felt the need to confirm something. At the mention of Senna, both their expressions darkened. But as the newly minted boyfriend, Terzo naturally had to stick close and act as her protector. Little did they know, their every move was being watched by a young man not far off. It wasn't long before news of the pair's activities that day reached Chris's ears. Everything seemed normal, yet unsettling rumors were swirling. Ceres' sudden appearance at Jinan's side that day, and the strange spectacle of the mutated creatures bowing before him. Though not at all humorous, everyone was saying Ceres had deliberately summoned the creatures, which led to him being shot. Hearing this, Chris was startled. After dismissing the informant, he racked his brain. No matter how he thought about it, something felt off. He didn't understand what was going on with those creatures, but he knew it had to be connected to Terzo. Yet everyone was pointing fingers at Ceres. Anyone with eyes could see Terzo was manipulating things. But Chris couldn't be certain. Even straining every ounce of his intellect, he couldn't figure out why Terzo wanted him to save Iota. Simply standing by would have easily eliminated a political rival. One thing after another, it was all too much for his head to handle. Thankfully, Bakshin hadn't mentioned anything about the basement incident, which allowed him a momentary sigh of relief. He wanted to go back to that basement, but just as he stepped out the door, he heard a commotion. The butler, maids, and his assistant were all gathered together. What new gossip was this? He approached his assistant to inquire. But before he could get an answer, he heard a familiar voice. Forced by his family to marry, he had finally snapped. He loved his cousin, yet everyone wanted him to marry her older sister. And after his older sister ran away, they turned around and blamed him for not being good enough. Even his beloved cousin cried, saying it was his fault. His only wish was for the 3 of them to live happily together within their chaotic family. But why won't anyone listen to me? Terzo felt like he was suffocating. That unshakable infatuation had slowly transformed into extreme aversion. That's why he chose to participate in the alliance plan. Though PRA was older, she possessed everything. She was a woman unbound by anything, and that made him feel like he could finally breathe, especially after PRA's words, "Don't you want to change the Kalikian family?" struck a chord within him. So, after having Chris rescue Viota at the hunting event, he incited the elders to pressure the head of the family. He not only accused the head of the family of concealing Mag's existence, but also expressed dissatisfaction with the decision to entrust Mag's protection to Beljurt. The elders, quick to label Beljurt an outsider, were nowhere to be seen during the crucial moment. Yet they had the audacity to want Beljurt out of the picture and to bring in the head of the Palvanon family. After all, hadn't they just saved Miss Viota? It was infuriating to hear. Enough. You're overstepping your bounds. A cane slammed against the floor with authority. Colikian matters are ultimately decided by me, this old woman. If you continue this prattle, there will be consequences. The elders, as expected, dared not push further. But the matter was far from over. As soon as the meeting ended, Viota, grabid terzo. What are you doing? Why did you save me in the forest? He denied everything, claiming it was just Chris meddling. She had considered this possibility before. So for a moment, she was speechless, watching Terzo walk away. But a sense of unease lingered in her heart. Whenever Terzo was in a bad mood, he would seek out Jenin. Looking at the half-severed little finger, Terzo remarked, "That must hurt." But Jenin laughed, finding the experience rather amusing. He even displayed an unconcealed fondness for Ceres. While PRA's plan was intriguing, it was doomed to fail. His baseless yet unwavering pronouncements. Terzo, his past life memories still unrecovered, naturally didn't understand. But the uncertainty of the outcome was what made it interesting. Wasn't it always this way? Two chaotic individuals, always acting on impulse. PRA, focused solely on his schemes, was furious. He wanted to squeeze the life out of Iota. He had deliberately driven the monstrous beasts towards her during the hunt, nearly killing his own daughter. What exactly transpired underground remained a mystery to him even now. He constantly reminded himself to stay calm. After all, he still had his final gambit. For 2 years, they had been pouring the blood of Colikia into the commoner's waterway. The day of the mutant interviews would be the day the 4 great families fell. He leaned back against the carriage, hoping for a moment's rest. But when he opened his eyes again, he was surrounded by darkness. A cold sweat trickled down his spine. Where was he? Ceres' secret of rebirth was about to be exposed. The place where the divine relic had been kept had inexplicably vanished. Had Jenin taken again? Or was there another variable at play? Events were spiraling out of control. A sense of foreboding washed over him. And then, just as he arrived home, he received an important letter from Viota. She wanted to ask him about the hunting competition. But with things as they were, he felt a meeting was pointless. Just as he thought this, Axion appeared before him, holding a bouquet of shimmering golden flowers. They were from the Beljurt estate. They were also Ceres' favorites from his past life. He stared, mesmerized. Their rich fragrance was intoxicating. He loved Axion, and he was happy. His hands reached up to encircle Axion's strong neck. He regretted not giving in to his desires sooner. The man's warm, large hands reminded him of their first meeting in his 6th life. To escape his abusive father, he had hidden in the slums. Back then, all he wanted was to find Mag and kill him. Then his suffering would end. But when he found the place, Mag was already gone. Before he could process his surprise, he heard a familiar voice. "You're the fool who caused all this, aren't you? Leaving traces of your power everywhere, acting without thinking. It's truly pathetic." The icy expression and each precisely spoken word pierced his soul. In his 5th life, he had almost killed Viota, and now he wanted to eliminate that child. That innocent child. Shame and guilt washed over him. In that moment, he understood what he had to do. Thankfully, there was still time. He would apologize to Axion, and then they would find Mag together. But when he voiced this thought, the man refused outright. He didn't want to work with a fool like him. He tried to speak, but Axion cut him off. Just leave. He never imagined that the years of unjust abuse from his family would be so readily apparent upon their first meeting, because the way he released his power was like a performance. It reeked of arrogance. But how could the man, without his past life memories, know that this was Ceres' sole reason for existence? He had awakened with immense divine power. But under his father's coercion, he had become his brother's weapon. Those with powers learned how to use them from their elders, but he'd never had that chance. And to prevent his brother from being shamed, he had honed his abilities to be as flamboyant as possible. In this life, he had escaped earlier, but the habit remained. He wanted to search for Mag with Axion. But if the other party refused, he had no grounds to argue. After all, Axion was right. He was just a show-off, satisfying his own vanity. But before leaving, he still hoped the other party would change their mind. Unexpectedly, not long after he left, Axion actually agreed. He even taught him how to control his abilities, and he quickly demonstrated them perfectly, even earning the man's praise. Today, they finally found where Mag was being held. The moment the two of them burst through the door, they saw a small boy, skin and bones, covered in injuries, lying still. The boy was surrounded by gems formed from coagulated blood. Seeing someone coming to rescue him, the boy's first glance fell upon Ceres. "Are you an angel?" The weak voice made Ceres' heart tremble. When his gaze met the boy's hollow green eyes, he understood. He could no longer hate this child. He even agreed to stay at the Belgirt estate to care for Mag. Faced with Axion's concern, he naturally answered about the child's condition. He didn't expect that the other party would actually be concerned about him, wanting to know if he was comfortable. "With you here, how could I not be comfortable?" he replied instinctively. A blush crept onto Axion's face, and he quickly changed the subject to Viota's birthday. Hearing the words, "Return Mag on her birthday," Ceres could no longer remain calm. The memory of himself choking Viota flashed through his mind. A sudden wave of nausea nearly made him lose his balance. Back in his room, his heart was consumed by guilt and self-reproach. The scene replayed itself in his dreams. More than the fear in that moment, he knew he couldn't relive his past life. So, owing Viota an apology, he went to a cake shop, hoping to choose a cake as a birthday gift. At the shopkeeper's suggestion, he carefully tasted the cake. The moment the cream danced on his tongue, he felt a sense of happiness for the first time. Unconsciously, he finished a small piece. "Viota will probably like this," he thought, but his vision began to blur as he looked at the shopkeeper. When he opened his eyes again, the place was filled with mutated venom. But what terrified him even more was his father's smile as he looked at him. "My daughter, it's been a long time." After his daughter awakened the family's divine power, his father had gone completely mad. Why did the flower bloom on the daughter and not the son? But today, he finally learned the truth. The ancient books recorded that the tears of Calicia could grant immense power to the members of the four great families. Looking at Ceres, who had been captured again, he cursed the traitor of Enoa Den. "So it was because of the tears that you bloomed." He even believed the reason his daughter ran away was to search for more tears, to usurp his and his son's position and take control of the family. It was utter nonsense. Ceres couldn't stand to hear another word. He went to find Mag, not for the tears at all. Unexpectedly, the accidental mention of Mag only further confirmed his father's twisted beliefs. His father cursed and swore, reaching into a small box in Terzo's left hand. "This is what you'll be eating from now on." Seeing that familiar, all too familiar blood, terror flooded Ceres once more. He instinctively wanted to explain, but his father remained merciless, demanding he pay the price. He even considered his awakening a stain on the Enoa Den family. Ceres refused to endure the pain of his past life again. He reached out, ready to unleash his power and obliterate these two. But why wouldn't his abilities work? He was terrified. Terzo let out a triumphant laugh, because while Ceres was unconscious, he had injected the blood of Calicia into Ceres' veins. The jewel can enhance abilities, while the blood of Calicia does the opposite. Things had come full circle. Ceres felt nothing but despair. He couldn't change a thing. His sixth life ended just like that, in a cold, sterile laboratory. But thanks to Axion, he had at least experienced a period of peace. Yet, PRA's miserable fate weighed heavily on Axion's heart. This time, he would make certain people pay. As he steeled his resolve, Cordelia sought out Terzo. Her mother, PRA, had been missing for 3 days. "Do you know where she is?" Cordelia pressed, convinced Terzo knew something. Or perhaps he was even responsible. But Terzo, preoccupied with an upcoming meeting with a guest, dismissively told her to go to Viota. "After all, you two are such good friends," he added sarcastically. Cordelia knew Terzo was mocking her, but she couldn't argue. Meanwhile, her mother, the one she desperately sought, was locked away in a dungeon. The silence was so profound, it felt as if time itself had stopped. She ran through the list of people who might have taken her, never suspecting it was him. The leader of Belgirt, Axion. PRA was so shocked, she almost couldn't speak. Had her schemes been discovered? Unsure of the situation, she fought down her fear, attempting to gauge Axion's intentions. "Why have you brought me here?" she asked. "You really don't know why?" Axion countered. PRA feigned composure. "Forgive my foolishness," she said. "How could I possibly presume to understand the leader's intentions? But I implore you, enlighten me." Axion scoffed. "A lowly creature like you? I do as I please. I need no reason. You touched something you shouldn't have. This is what you deserve. PRA couldn't believe the man's madness. He was actually going to kill her. Has someone else been treated this way before? She stammered, grasping at straws. She didn't understand a thing. But don't be too afraid, Axion continued, not planning to kill her immediately. He wouldn't let this old woman die as easily as she had in his past life. The king appeared again, but something felt different. Ceres was curious what the original 4 great families meant to the king. They were companions, brothers, even children. But the more he valued them, the more the king wanted them to experience the betrayal he felt when his heart was ripped out. Everything comes full circle. Though he didn't admit it, Ceres had already guessed the answer. The infighting among the 4 great families couldn't be a coincidence. Someone like PRA, a minor player, was likely the king's handiwork. Unfortunately, the barrier meeting was over. As the king's shadow receded, Ceres slowly woke up. He had come here today to retrieve a divinity shard. Unexpectedly, a mutated monster stood guard. When he released his captivating roses, the foul beast was forced to stand down, mesmerized. The earth had clearly been disturbed. Thankfully, the shard was still in its box. But even if it hadn't been, it didn't matter. It would have found its way back to him eventually, just as he finished absorbing the divine essence. He felt a wave of dizziness. His consciousness was pulled into another space. There, he encountered the king's remnant. Compared to before, he could sense its increased power. He could also clearly feel the monster's worry. It seemed he had been asleep for a long time. Listening to the monster's pained cries, he thought, "I'm leaving. What will become of you?" He hesitated for a few seconds, but knew what he had to do. With a snap, he put the monster into an eternal slumber. It was the kindest option. He would never have guessed, however, that the divinity relic taken prematurely last time was now in Chris's possession, a crown no bigger than his palm. Is it really that valuable, Chris? Chris muttered to himself, unable to fathom why Ceres would be searching for such a thing. A strange aura emanated from the object, unsettling him. It felt familiar, like something he'd encountered before. The memory flickered. Axion, the Four Seasons forest. It was when he was impersonating him. A woman had been there, radiating an alluring scent. The clearer the memory became, the more Chris felt a sense of unease. This was no ordinary trinket. Ordering his subordinates to continue investigating, Chris pocketed the relic and headed out, intent on hiding it away. He was intercepted by Jiaopali. He'd been avoiding her ever since her last visit. He hadn't expected her to seek him out again. Before he could express his annoyance, however, Jiaopali burst into tears, wailing, "I'm so hungry." The servants had been ignoring her, leaving her to starve for days. Chris, despite his dislike for the woman, found their negligence a challenge to his authority. He immediately ordered his men to take Jiaopali and see to her needs. As he watched her pathetic sobbing, her face suddenly morphed into Ceres's. The image was so vivid, it felt like a memory resurfacing. He immediately dispatched a letter to Inoa Denver. He needed to see Ceres urgently. Axion, now fully aware of the truth of his reincarnation, was consumed by rage. Memories of his past lives flooded his mind. His beloved Ceres, subjected to horrific experiments by his own father, had died tragically. Over and over again, Axion would make them all pay. Slowly torturing PRA, he tracked down his father-in-law. Gripping the old man by the collar, he dragged him away. This time, he had a different kind of game in mind. Jego never would have imagined that after being imprisoned in the basement by the fetal lock for so long, his escape would finally come with the collapse of the structure. He could barely walk, yet, driven by his ingrained sexism, he was determined to find his precious daughter. Seeing Axion and hearing him mention his daughter, he lost all reason. He demanded to know her whereabouts, if she was hurt, if she was well. In response, a strange energy enveloped him, and the flesh of his hand began to visibly rot. He collapsed, screaming in agony. Axion had intended to force his father-in-law to kneel before Ceres and beg forgiveness. But now it seemed pointless. Not everyone deserved the chance to repent. Meanwhile, in the dungeons, Terzo Esse, madness deepened. He had captured not only Ricardo, but also the former head of the Dong family. His goal, to eradicate all supernatural abilities from the world. He believed the Calicia family's fragmentation stemmed from the inequality created by these powers. Better to erase them entirely. Producing a vial of Calicia blood, he wanted to test his theory. Were the members of the 4 great families truly immune to mutation? As he injected the blood into his captives, Ceres returned home, covered in blood. "Did you run into a swarm of mushrooms?" Axion asked, though Ceres had only encountered one. Still, it had left him coated in a sticky residue. He struggled to remove his soiled clothes. The maid was fetching water for his bath. "Here, let me help," Axion offered, reaching for the clasp on the back of Ceres' tunic. He hadn't noticed the bloodstains on his shoes, but Ceres did. Luckily, the maid returned, announcing the bath was ready. As Ceres turned, bare back exposed, to bid him good night, Axion felt a pang in his chest, the shy blush on Ceres' face. Was this the same man who had just tortured his father-in-law? After 8 lifetimes, he had finally found happiness. A simple stumble, a fall to the ground, and a father's hand reached out in concern. Carefully, she checked him for injuries. His brother, hearing the commotion, came running. "Ceres, are you all right? My little sister is so strong. She didn't even cry when she fell." And in this lifetime, their mother was still alive. His brother rushed into their mother's arms, praising his sister's bravery. "Ceres, come here, darling. I have your favorite treats." Truly, a child with a mother is treasured. But in the instant a hand reached out, it was Jia Polly who appeared before him. He was no longer a little girl cradled in her father's arms. Before he could understand what was happening, his sister tied something around his wrist, a rose corsage, the symbol of Anoa Den. "Father just brought this back as a gift." Ceres listened, bewildered, as his sister chattered on. This happiness felt strangely unreal. Whether it was the fairy tales by his father's bedside or the joyful runs with his brother in the meadow, it all felt like a fleeting dream. He blinked and Axion was by his side. They both felt as if they had met too late. If only their parents had betrothed them sooner. But before they could fully enjoy their moment together, 2 small figures appeared at the door, calling for Papa and Mama. A son and a daughter. Such a happy, yet troublesome, blessing. Sadly, this beautiful life was nothing but a dream. Ceres woke up in a daze, seeing Axion's worried expression. Everything had indeed been a dream. It had been 3 days and 3 nights since he had encountered the king's remnant. During those 3 days, the whispers about him summoning the monster at the hunting competition hadn't ceased. Everyone said Ceres had done it on purpose. And then there was the young nobleman Axion had killed, though it was an accident. Some claimed to have seen the green-haired youth raise his sword not to attack the monster, but to aim at the Anoa Den family. Even though Anoa Den's retainers dismissed it as a rumor, the gossip only intensified. Meanwhile, Cordelia remained distracted. It wasn't just her dislike of the banquet, but also the continued absence of her mother, with no word. She had initially suspected Terzo, but his demeanor suggested genuine ignorance. A deep unease settled in her heart. Where could her mother be? The moment the rose bloomed within him, the dragon completely collapsed. Ceres languidly ran a hand through his hair, observing the astonished onlookers. After another dilution of his divinity, he had slept for 3 full days. Yet, sleep still clung to him. Axion, resting his head on Ceres' lap, worried if he should go back to sleep. "No need," Ceres murmured, stroking Axion's hair. Small animals gathered around them. This peaceful, beautiful moment reminded him of the fleeting dream. Those images felt like glimpses of the past and future, but more like the longings of his heart. Though he yearned for children of his own, it was best not to have something he couldn't be responsible for. Having Axion was enough. He had thought much would have transpired in 3 days. But his attendant informed him that aside from a few letters from Parvizan requesting a meeting, the only other news was the internal conflict within the Kalisha family and Violetta's murder of Terzo. Nothing major, really. However, there was a tea party at the Montana estate that afternoon, and he had a reason he needed to attend. Cordelia greeted the guests warmly, showing no sign of worry about her missing mother. She had been telling everyone her mother was ill. When Violetta offered her condolences, Cordelia gave the same response. After inviting Violetta to go in and enjoy herself, the people he'd been waiting for finally appeared. A red-haired woman led the group. They were all dressed like ordinary people. They announced they were there to see PRA. They had arranged a meeting 3 weeks prior, but had been unable to contact anyone for PRA's side. Cordelia recognized some of them, but she'd definitely never seen the last man, the one with the bob haircut. A sense of unease settled over her. She lied, claiming her mother had entrusted all matters to her, and said, "Please, follow me." Dusk was approaching. The tea party continued its lively chatter. Ceres appeared silently on the roof. He'd almost missed it due to an afternoon nap. Suddenly, as if he'd seen something, he vanished without a trace. Meanwhile, the group that had come to see PRA was arguing. It seemed the disagreement stemmed from Cordelia being informed of their business. The red-haired woman was about to speak, clearly struggling with the situation. Then, suddenly, she went terrifyingly still. When her companions turned to look, they were horrified by the sight. The woman's body had erupted into a grotesque bloom of something. She died right before their eyes. Ceres stepped forward, his boots crunching on the remains. "How convenient," he said. "You're all here. Makes it easier to deal with you at once." He eliminated everyone, but his predecessor arrived just as he finished. With a single, languid glance, Ceres recognized the last vestiges of a familiar divinity. "So it was you who took it." Before Chris could react, thorns whipped past him. With a gasp, his subordinate was impaled. At the same time, the box he carried was being opened. Ceres' eyes were unervingly innocent. Vines coiled around the crown-like relic. By the time Ceres held it, it had transformed into a crystal imbued with divine power. Chris rushed towards his fallen subordinate. He couldn't believe it. He had only wanted to know the truth behind the recent events. His letters to Ceres had gone unanswered. He'd finally gotten this chance at the tea party, only to have someone who'd been by his side since childhood lose their life. A sudden golden light blinded him. The truth he sought flooded his mind. Ceres had died. It felt like he died right before his eyes. He remembered Ceres living in his home. But by the time he learned his older brother had sent Ceres back to Inoa Den, it was too late. Memories of his past life rushed in like a tidal wave. He was utterly stunned. Meanwhile, Ceres, bathed in golden light, swallowed the last of the something. The divinity made him dizzy. Chris heard a thud. The girl he once loved had closed her eyes again. "No, stop. You can't just leave." He reached out, a mixture of fear and regret consuming him. "It's my fault. I didn't mean any of those cruel things I said." Tears of remorse streamed down his face. "I swear I won't do it again. Please don't die. Open your eyes. Please." His voice trembled, heartbreaking in its desperation. "Don't touch him with your filthy hands." Belgert's ability stopped Chris's advance. He was unworthy, whether Ceres lived or died. "Even if it's just a shell, it belongs to me." Axion arrived, gathering his beloved into his arms, staking his claim. Then, with a whoosh, they vanished from the bloody scene. Chris was left alone in the desolate aftermath. It would take him a long time to process this ending. Meanwhile, by the lake in the small woods, Cordelia was also in disbelief. That red-haired woman, she claimed Cordelia's mother, was experimenting with Calicia blood. Why would her mother do such a thing? Cordelia didn't even have anyone to ask. But in a past life, she didn't remember. Ceres had approached her about this very thing. When she first received Montana's invitation, Ceres had met these people. They seemed like nothing more than an ordinary merchant group. But the chicken leg-shaped scar on the woman's neck was distinctive. He felt it warranted further investigation. He saw her again, however, in the winter following PRA's death sentence. "If you spare PRA's life," she pleaded, kneeling at his feet, "I'm willing to help you find a way to restore the mutated." He granted her a year. "If you find a method within a year," he conceded, "I'll consider it." This time around, though, it seemed he wouldn't need her. After his daughter-in-law had roundly kicked him to the ground, his son had confined him within a barrier. The silence was so profound that even passing gas sounded like a firecracker. As Sturman sat bored, picking at his toes, a servant girl drifted towards him like a wraith. She repeatedly slammed her head against the barrier, blood gushing from her forehead. Oblivious to the pain, she continued. "Oh dear," Sturman muttered. "Has someone else been infected?" With a snap of his fingers, the servant girl vanished into dust. Sturman couldn't fathom what Jin and Belgert was up to. "Nothing much," she replied, "just tidying up." The barrier felt as robust as ever. Axion confining him here implied he knew something. Jinin gestured, alluding to past events. But Sturman was lost, assuming she was suffering from some form of dementia. She then requested the barrier be removed so she could meet her soon-to-be daughter-in-law, Ceres. He refused without a second thought. After all, Jinin couldn't break the barrier. Or so he thought. With a gentle palm against the barrier and a moment to gather her strength, the immense barrier began to tremble. Even with Sturman desperately trying to reinforce it, he'd underestimated Jinin's power. Though it cost her a finger, she shattered the barrier with ease. Coughing up blood, Sturman realized he'd been tricked. Jinin's aim hadn't just been to break the barrier, but to provoke him into losing control. Black energy seeped from his body. He felt the beast within clawing for release. Axion, sensing the broken barrier, knew Jinin had succeeded. His priority now was to hide Ceres. Taking the golden key Jinin had given him, he turned it in the invisible lock. The hidden chamber within the king's temple opened. He gently laid the sleeping Ceres within the sarcophagus. Rose vines erupted, spiraling around her, a breathtakingly beautiful tableau. He'd used the Belgirt space, meant for a single occupant of a generation, to hide his daughter-in-law. But here, at least, she was safe. It was the best option for Ceres now. Scattered across the floor were blue gems of varying sizes, Calikia's tears. Jinin had tried to break this barrier in past lives, but only now had she succeeded. It was a testament to her increased power. He picked up a tear and brought it to his lips. His eyes glowed with a feline luminescence. A lavender aura enveloped him, his power surging as the vines continued to spread, consuming half the chamber. Ceres, like a sleeping beauty, lay still. But in her dreams, she returned to her seventh life. Mag had grown up, yet he wasn't happy. Though they'd found a way to cure the mutated in this life, the grown-up Mag had died at some point. An unremarkable red tear held the cure for all mutated humans. Ceres hadn't imagined the gem formed from Mag, consuming her blood, would have such an impact. But to actually use it, she couldn't bear to think of the toll it would take on Mag. "It's all right," he insisted. "I'm willing to be the subject." And so, they achieved victory. 5 years later, the mutations vanished entirely. The four families held a celebratory banquet, but Ceres couldn't bring herself to feel joy. This victory had come at too great a cost. Lost in thought, Ceres was startled by a voice calling out from behind him. He accepted the wine glass offered by Axion. Though polite words flowed from his lips, he couldn't shake a feeling of unease in the man's presence. Axion's words caught him off guard. "You don't have to be so formal with me. You'll be the master of Anoa Den soon enough, after all." It was then that Ceres remembered. Since the beginning of the Seventh Age, he and Axion had worked together on many matters. Yet their relationship remained strangely ambiguous. Not lovers, not quite friends either. But being able to see the world from the same vantage point as Axion was the greatest difference in this life. He could finally stand beside him as an equal. A flicker of yearning ignited within him. Perhaps, like ordinary people waiting for the quiet end of their lives, he too could find peace in this lifetime. A smile touched his lips. "After I become the leader, if you still wish it, then I will listen to you." It was a promise, one that Axion silently etched into his heart. Suddenly, a thought struck him, and a blush crept up his neck, staining his face crimson. "Ceres," he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. "I have something I want to tell you. Could you spare me some time tonight?" Receiving an affirmative answer, he finally departed, a sense of contentment settling over him. He didn't know that this departure would be his last. Jia Pali, seizing the opportunity, returned, whining and berating Ceres for her supposed heartlessness. He complained about their father and brother's recent release from prison and their suffering, questioning how Ceres, their own daughter and sister, could simply ignore them. Ceres couldn't bring herself to even acknowledge him. Only with Violetta's arrival did a smile return to Ceres' face. He comforted the guilt-ridden Violetta, assuring her, "The mutations aren't your fault." He had suffered greatly from the curse of Kalicia's blood, yet he still retained this kindness. Violetta felt a pang of emotion, tears pricking her eyes. Mid-sentence, she remembered Mag's message. He wanted to give Ceres a gift before the banquet, insisting on delivering it personally. Such secrecy. Ceres couldn't help but indulge his whim. On the way, curiosity gnawed at him, wondering what the gift could be. But Mag's door stood ajar. Was someone else inside? Without further thought, he peered through the crack. The sight that greeted him would become a haunting nightmare. Mag was dead, and there, trembling beside the body, was Jia Pali. He had slaughtered everyone, right in front of the person Ceres held dear. "Are you here to stop me?" Jia Pali asked. But how could Ceres bring himself to harm him? A broken laugh escaped his lips. He was the first to discover Mag's body, with Jia Pali right there. "I didn't do this, sister. What should I do? Will they put me in prison?" Ceres stood numb, listening to Jia Poli's frantic denials. Jia Poli clung to him, sobbing and pleading for help. But Ceres had no answers. Just then, a maid rushed in, crying out, "Master Mag, something terrible has happened." She stopped short, taking in the horrific scene. "Oh my God, what happened here?" she shrieked. "Sister did it. It was Sister Ceres." Jia Poli instantly shifted the blame. "Look at all the blood on him. I only got blood on me because I tried to stop him." Ceres couldn't recall what happened next. He somehow became the accused murderer of Mag. Everyone claimed he did it for Kalish's tears. They even said he tried to pin the blame on his younger brother. Some whispered that he must have mutated, losing all sense of conscience. Violetta, the only witness who could clear his name, was mysteriously stabbed on the night of the banquet. But the greatest betrayal came from his own brother, who condemned him to die in Jia Poli's place. It's just a moment of pain. Can't you endure it for poor Jia Poli? Just die one more time for him. In that moment, clarity pierced through the fog. All his efforts had been in vain. "You bastard, Ricardo!" he roared, as thorny rose vines erupted from the ground. The steel prison door bent like tin, twisted aside by a force unseen. He stood before the scum, his gaze unwavering. Hot blood splattered his face. In that moment, he felt utterly foolish. All this time, a flick of his wrist could have ended it all. 7 lifetimes wasted. The realization fueled a merciless slaughter. Everyone in Anoa Den died. He stared at his blood-soaked hands. A lightness he'd never known settled over him. If this was his destined end, he hoped this time he would truly die by Axian's hand. "Why won't you do it?" he pleaded. "Must I kill you?" "No, I can't." Axian reached out. "Please come here," he begged, desperately trying to save the girl he loved. "Forgive me," she whispered, weary of it all. "Someone as selfish and foolish as I." "Don't reach for me again," Ceres said, her gaze fixed on the empty sky, hollow and desolate. With a sickening thud, she allowed the thorns to pierce her frail body. Rose petals rained down, stained crimson with blood. "No, Ceres!" Axian's anguished roar ripped through the air, but her cold body offered no response. He could do nothing but howl in pain. This was Ceres's 7th life. Reliving it all again, the agony was suffocating. The king, who had been waiting, finally appeared. He took Ceres's love for Axian, intending to mold her into the next king. But no, she could lose everything else, but not her love for Axian. Reliving the pain of her 7 lives, Ceres felt something within her vanish. Seeing the king's remnants again, she wondered, "Is this because of your influence?" The king's heart, she realized, was a coalescence of stars. When the 4 families divided the spoils, Inoa consumed the largest piece. That stellar power mingled with the power of Inoa Den. Each generation inherited a fragment of that light. Though weakened over time, the residual starlight remained. But now the time had come. The king approached, gently touching her forehead. Her power, she discovered, came from the king, not Inoa. This explained her family's animosity. She was an anomaly, still reeling from the revelation. The king spoke of the cursed past. Inoa Den craved eternal life. Kalikia desired the power to dominate all things. Parvanan yearned for unmatched authority, and Beljurt, for the sake of love, betrayed him. Thus, the king declared, they would be destroyed for their greed. A unborn of blood would end in blood. Beljurt would ultimately find love unattainable, and the bloodline of Inoa Den would meet its end. Everything unfolding was a consequence of karmic law. But the king, unable to bear Ceres's suffering through reincarnation, offered her a chance to escape. However, physical desires, attachments, and all human emotions would vanish. Ceres struggled to comprehend. The king took what was most precious to her. She lunged towards him, but he only said, "I hope you become whole soon." His final words, fading into nothingness, were lost to her. She couldn't hear them anymore. Meanwhile, Axian clashed with his mother. When he arrived at Inoa Den, Jenin had just punched a hole through the barrier. She needed to see Ceres. A mutant had appeared in the house, but the timing was earlier than in the previous life. This time, he wouldn't stand idly by. "You know how your father will die, don't you?" he asked, testing the waters. His son's calm reaction confirmed his suspicions. "You remember too." But Axian only wanted to know how to cure the mutant. Although he remembered his past life, the specific methods remained hazy. Judging by her words, this time she intended to save her husband from being killed by the mutants. Axian thought his mother was rather simple-minded. "You orchestrated all of this, and now you talk about protecting your loved one? You watched him die miserably before, didn't you? Even if our goals align now, I won't give you the answers you want. I'll just have to ask series then. A threatening edge sharpened his mother's voice. This crossed his final line. A palpable killing intent radiated from him. Jinan, however, just laughed. She advised her son to hurry up and find Sturman, because I've employed a little trick. If that guy loses control, more than just a couple of people will die. But Axion only smiled, a chillingly wicked curve of his lips. A large, dark sphere of energy coalesced in his palm. He flung it at his mother without hesitation. A deafening boom echoed, leaving Jinan blackened by the blast. So, you figured out how to use the key. Thanks to you. Otherwise, I wouldn't have eaten something so disgusting. His power transformed into countless sharp weapons, launching another wave of attack. But you'll have a hard time defeating me, because I also swallowed Calikia's tears.